Several hours later, Han Li finally emerged from the ice rift, but he immediately withdrew the azure light around him and hovered in midair amid the bone-chilling winds. Within the inner valley, his spiritual sense was still quite significantly restricted, so it would be very difficult for him to search through the air with his spiritual sense alone. After contemplating the situation for a short while, Han Li patted the spirit beast pouch hanging from his waist. The sound of loud buzzing immediately rang out as countless gold-devouring beetles swarmed out of the pouch, forming a cloud of golden beetles that revolved in the air above his head. He rapidly made a series of hand seal and cast several incantation seals into the swarm of beetles in the quick succession. He then sat onto the ground with his legs folded and slowly closed his eyes. The cloud of golden beetles split up of their own accord, transforming into countless golden flowers that shot forth in all directions, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Han Li had divided his spiritual sense into countless strands to search for the three women. Given that the three women were only at the core formation stage, and none of them were rash individuals, Han Li's thought process was that even if they had ventured into the inner valley, they wouldn't have gone very far into its depths. As such, he was only searching through a relatively small area initially. After failing to discover any leads within that area, Han Li flew several tens of kilometers further into the inner valley before releasing his gold-devouring beetles again. As such, Han Li was naturally able to easily discover some traces left behind by the three women on the mountain, where the three women had been searching for illusionary spirit herbs. Upon making this discovery through the use of the gold-devouring beetles, Han Li was ecstatic, and he immediately headed over to that place in person for a closer inspection. As a result, he discovered some signs to verify that the three women had indeed entered the inner valley, and that they had stayed on this mountain for a substantial period of time. However, when he expanded the scope of his search again, there were no further leads to be discovered. In the end, Han Li returned to the summit of the mountain and fell into deep thought. After a period of contemplation, he suddenly let loose a long cry, and all of the gold-devouring beetles, in a radius of several tens of kilometers, came flying back toward him before they were stored away into his spirit beast pouch again. However, Han Li then immediately pulled out another pouch, from within which 12 snowy white centipedes flew out. They were none other than his 6-winged frost centipedes. Han Li made a hand seal, and the 12 centipedes dispersed at his behest, transforming into 12 gusts of glacial wind that disappeared in different directions in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Han Li remained rooted to the spot. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. After an indeterminate period of time, Han Li stirred as he transformed into a streak of azure light and flew back in the direction that he had come from. A short while later, he discovered a snowy white centipede circling over a certain spot in the air, uttering a low screeching sound as it did so. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he immediately flew over to the snowy white centipede. He looked down toward the ground, only to discover a long and thin black object down below. This object was lying in a patch of grass, making it appear as if it were a completely nondescript black branch, so it was no wonder that his gold-devouring beetles hadn't discovered it earlier. Han Li's brows furrowed as he raised a hand, and the branch-like object was sucked into his hand. He inspected the object carefully, upon which his expression changed minutely. This wasn't some branch, it was clearly a small section of a feeler. Furthermore, from the glacial chi that this object was exuding, it was none other than the feeler of a 6-winged frost centipede. However, 6-winged frost centipedes had pristine white feelers, yet this one was as black as ink, and the dark aura emanating from it was also something that Han Li was very familiar with. This was none other than profound yin devilish chi. Furthermore, this devilish chi seemed to be even purer than that used by zenith yin. Han Li stroked the small section of the feeler and waves of shock surged through his heart. One had to realize that profound yin devilish chi could only be cultivated using the profound yin arts, and aside from Zenith Yin and Wu Chu, both of whom had fallen by his hands, most of Zenith Yin's other disciples hadn't been given the entirety of this cultivation art. As such, there was no way that they would be able to cultivate such pure devilish chi and travel to the heavenly south region. Han Li's expression was quite befuddled as he fell into deep thought. Wait, there's something else that knows all of the mantras in the profound yin arts and has cultivated the profound yin devilish chi. It seems like it would also be able to cultivate this devilish qi to such a high degree of purity. A thought abruptly occurred to Han Li as a peculiar look appeared on his face. Could it be that the wood spirit nascent has also returned to the heavenly south region? Han Li murmured to himself as he looked up into the sky. He had always hung up on this missing second nascent soul. After returning to the heavenly south region, he should have set off immediately to search for this nascent soul. Yet Nangongwan was still yet to break out of the ice wall, and his concern for her dissuaded him from embarking on such a long journey. Furthermore, so many years had already passed, and if this second nascent soul was able to attain sentient will, then it would have done so long ago. As such, it didn't really matter when he set off to search for it. As such, he had set this matter aside completely, and decided to take a trip to the Mulan Plains several years down the track. However, it appeared that this second nascent soul had returned to the heavenly south region of its own accord, and was hiding within the Devil Fall Valley. In that case, it most likely had something to do with the disappearance of Mu Paling's trio, which ironically meant that they were most likely still safe. After all, the nascent soul had completely replicated his memories and emotions. Even if its personality had been altered after all these years, it was still very unlikely that it would kill those three women in cold blood. Han Li wore a grave expression as he considered all of the possibilities involved. After so many years had passed, the second nascent soul would have most likely possessed a body of its own already. Furthermore, from the moment that he had entered the inner valley, he hadn't sensed any trace of the sovereign devil corpse, which he had planted a wisp of his spiritual sense into. With that in mind, it appeared that the devil corpse hadn't been subdued by the second nascent soul, it had to have been possessed instead. Countless thoughts flashed through Han Li's mind as he placed himself in the second nascent soul's shoes, and the truth was soon made apparent to him. He stroked his chin and heaved a long sigh. Right at this moment, the remaining centipedes all flew toward him from different directions, and it didn't appear as if they had discovered anything. Han Li wasn't very surprised to see this. The reason why he withdrew the gold-devouring beetles and released the 12 six-winged frost centipedes instead was naturally because Liu Yu was carrying six-winged frost centipede with her as well. Even though her spirit insects were of a far inferior grade compared to his own, it was possible to find the three women through a connection between the spirit insects. However, seeing as the perpetrator here was most likely his second nascent soul, it would definitely have taken measures to prevent this method from working. Han Li stowed away the centipedes and contemplated the situation in silence with a dark expression on his face. It appears I'll have to use that method to track them. I attained this secret technique after it went missing, so there's no way for it to take measures against this technique. It's just that I'm going to have to expend some blood essence now, Han Li murmured to himself reluctantly, seemingly rather unwilling to resort to this method. However, he still patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist in the end, upon which a white jade plate and a small crimson flag appeared in his hands at the same time. He tossed the two items into the air, and they flew upward as two streaks of light, one white and one red, before hovering in front of him. Han Li then opened his mouth, and a ball of azure light enshrouded the formation plate. He then slid a finger over the wrist of his other arm, inflicting a thin gash following a flash of azure light. A few drops of blood essence then flowed out of the gash on his wrist. Han Li blew on the drops of blood essence, and they immediately disappeared into the white jade plate. Han Li then pointed a finger toward the small crimson flag, and it flew directly above the formation plate at his behest. The flag then tremored slightly before transforming into a ball of crimson mist that enshrouded the jade plate within. Han Li began to chant something, and the jade plate also began to glow with a crimson light, following which bursts of crimson mist materialized from his blood essence began to emerge. The crimson mist then merged to form a single cloud of blood mist in the air. At this point, Han Li suddenly let loose a low cry and azure light flashed from his eyes as he pointed a finger toward the jade plate. Brilliant crimson light immediately radiated from the jade plate, giving it the appearance of a crimson full moon, and in just a few flashes, it had absorbed all of the blood mist wafting around it. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Han Li let loose a low cry as he stabbed his finger toward the jade plate again. A pillar of green light then shot forth from his fingertip, before disappearing into the center of the jade plate in a flash. A loud ringing sound rang out from the blood moon, and it began to tremor violently, as if it were going to rise into the air and flying away. The light in Han Li's eyes dimmed slightly as a wry smile appeared on his face. This is the first time I'm using the blood moon spirit-seeking secret technique from the Great Development Treasure Scriptures. I wonder if it's actually going to be as effective as the scriptures proclaim it to be. Only one way to find out, I guess. If it weren't for the fact that I kept a few drops of Mu Paling's blood essence when I was setting up the spirit restriction in her, I wouldn't even be able to unleash this secret technique. Han Li murmured to himself as he swallowed a pill before sitting down on the spot with his legs crossed. When Han Li opened his eyes again an hour later, he was back to his prime condition. He immediately cast an incantation seal toward the jade plate, upon which the blood moon transformed into a piercing streak of crimson light as it flew into the distance. Han Li's body swayed, and his body also transformed into an azure streak of light, flying behind the crimson light in hot pursuit. Within the blink of an eye, the two streaks of light had completely disappeared from view. The crimson ball of light flew along at an even pace, and Han Li also followed closely behind it. After flying for close to half a day, Han Li was led by the crimson ball of light into an extremely barren and secluded basin. A burst of scorching heat immediately came rushing toward him. Han Li's expression changed slightly, and he discovered that everything within the basin was either black or red. On the outskirts of the basin were spherical black rocks, while a crimson lake of lava was situated at its center. The scorching temperatures emanating from the lava lake was making even the air above the basin shimmer and warp, creating a rather twisted and ethereal scene to behold. The ball of crimson light was revolving in the air above the lava lake, emitting a sharp screeching sound at the same time, looking as if it wanted to descend, but it didn't dare to do so. Han Li stroked his chin and looked at the lava down below as a cold smile suddenly appeared on his face. It really does know how to find good hiding places. If it weren't for the guidance of the secret technique, I really wouldn't have been able to find this place. However, now that I know this is where they are, some lava isn't going to be able to stop me. Han Li raised a hand, and the crimson ball of light immediately whizzed through the air toward him before landing obediently in the center of his palm. Han Li raised his other then, and a spluttering sound erupted as purple flames instantly surfaced along his entire arm, quickly encompassing his whole body. Thus, a massive purple fireball came tumbling down directly from above. The fireball that Han Li had transformed into was able to completely disregard the scorching crimson lava down below, landing with a loud thump before disappearing into the lava lake. A massive splash erupted over the surface of the lake, but it soon reverted back to its peaceful and tranquil state, as if nothing had ever happened. At this point, Han Li had already reached a depth of over 100 feet down into the lava, and he continued to descend even further. Even though he had been completely submerged in lava, his purple apex flames, which were a glacial flame, were able to easily keep the scorching temperatures at bay. After diving down for over 2,000 feet, Han Li finally reached the lake bed, and his feet landed on the ground, which was lined with solid black rocks. He looked around and was unable to see anything aside from vast expanses of crimson in all directions. Han Li's brows furrowed as he injected his spiritual power into his eyes, upon which a blue light flashed within the depths of his pupils. He had unleashed his bright-sight spirit eyes. After surveying his surroundings once again, Han Li raised the crimson jade plate in his hand. The jade plate swayed before rattling incessantly toward a certain direction, as if it were attempting to break free from his grasp. Han Li immediately flew toward that direction, and after flying for a certain distance, the jade plate suddenly stopped rattling, abruptly plummeting downward instead. Han Li was able to react in time and caught the jade plate again. Only then was he able to prevent it from escaping the protective cocoon formed by the purple flames. At the same time, he also cast his gaze directly below himself. His expression changed slightly as he raised a hand, upon which a piercing burst of golden light shot forth, heading directly toward the lake bed. Following a resounding boom, a massive rift around 70 to 80 feet in length was sliced into the seemingly normal lake bed. Blue light immediately radiated from within the rift, warding off all of the scorching lava. There was a light barrier restriction beneath this lake bed. Han Li was ecstatic upon seeing this, and he immediately dove toward the light barrier without any hesitation. The blue light barrier clearly wasn't an extremely sophisticated restriction, as his purple apex flames were able to easily burn a large hole of around 10 feet in diameter into its surface. Han Li immediately flashed through that hole and appeared on the other side of the light barrier. The blue light barrier immediately sealed over, keeping the lava at bay again. Han Li paid this no heed, as he began to survey his surroundings again. At this moment, he found himself in a secret underground tunnel. The ground and all of the walls were extremely bumpy and uneven, making it appear as if it were a naturally forming tunnel rather than one that had been artificially created. Hanli immediately tossed out his jade plate again. The jade plate revolved in the air before transforming into a crimson moon again and hurtling deeper into the tunnel. Hanli rose up into the air expressionlessly and followed closely behind the blood moon. After flying for around 2 to 3 kilometers, the tunnel began to gradually slope upward. After advancing for a further 1,000 feet or so, Hanli finally saw light up ahead, indicating that he had arrived at the exit. The blood moon immediately flew toward the light without any hesitation. However, Hanli wore a rather wary expression as he flapped his sleeves soundlessly to summon a ball of 3-colored flames. This was none other than his triflame fan. Hanli grasped the fan in his hand and his body swayed, taking him to the exit of the tunnel in the next instant, where he stood, examining his surroundings cautiously. His surroundings were very dark and dim, yet everything was extremely clear to his bright-sight spirit eyes. This was a natural underground cave, and it appeared to be completely devoid of human presence. Hanli raised an eyebrow as his gaze fell upon an exit at the end of the cave, which seemed to be leading to another cave. At this moment, the blood moon was flying directly toward that exit. However, its momentum was arrested as soon as it reached the opening, and it began to emit a sharp buzzing sound. A crisp crack then rang out, and a dozen or so thin black cracks appeared over the surface of the blood moon. Following one final flash, the crimson moon disintegrated into specks of light. As opposed to being alarmed upon seeing this, Hanli was, instead, ecstatic. It only took him a few steps to reach the other cave connected to this one, and he found himself situated within an even larger cave than the previous one. However, when he focused his gaze and looked around him, he faltered slightly at the sight that he beheld. The entire cave was filled with tumbling pitch-black mist that encompassed almost every single inch of space within the area. However, as soon as some of this mist reached the exit of the cave, they were completely unable to progress any further, seemingly having been halted by an invisible barrier. With his bright-sight spirit eyes to enhance his vision, the pitch-black cave that would render normal cultivators completely blind was as clear as air to Hanli. Thus, he was able to immediately catch sight of the 3 women lying completely stationary at the center of the cave. They were none other than Mu Paling's trio. Beneath the 3 of them, there was a strange formation spell that was shimmering with faint spiritual light, and the black mist was being expelled incessantly from that formation. Hanli didn't immediately rush in to save the 3 women. Instead, he examined every single inch of the cave with his spiritual sense, and after verifying that his second nascent soul wasn't lurking in the shadows somewhere, he decisively feigned a grabbing motion toward the air at the opening of the cave. Golden light flashed, and the sound of something being ruptured rang out. The dense black mist immediately came surging out from within the other cave and tumbling straight toward Hanli. However, Hanli merely made a hand seal, and a loud thunderclap erupted as a layer of golden lightning arcs surfaced over his body. All of the black mist that came into contact with the arcs of lightning were immediately reduced to nothingness. Hanli strode forward and waded directly into the black mist. The golden arcs of lightning danced around him amid bursts of erratic crackling, keeping all of the black mist firmly at bay. However, the black mist seemingly possessed intelligence as it converged to form a dozen or so black snakes of different sizes in the blink of an eye. The snakes circled around Hanli in a menacing manner, wanting to throw themselves at him, but not daring to do so. Hanli's expression darkened upon seeing this, and the triflame fan in his hand disappeared in a flash. At the same time, the arcs of lightning that had surfaced over his body became even more dazzling. He swept his sleeves through the air, and 2 golden lightning worms shot forth, tearing through the black snakes with ease and reducing them to nothingness in the blink of an eye. The 2 lightning worms then continued their assault, sweeping through the surrounding black mist with reckless abandon. Amid a series of rumbling booms, the black mist was completely eradicated, and Hanli was able to access the formation without any further impediment. After taking just cursory glance at this formation, Hanli could already tell that this was merely an extremely simple illusionary formation. It appeared that the 3 women's magic power must have been restricted. Otherwise, a formation of this caliber was nowhere near sufficient to trap 3 core formation cultivators. With that in mind, Han Li immediately flicked his 10 fingers toward the formation in quick succession. A dozen or so bursts of golden sword chi struck the formation almost with complete synchronicity. The formation was immediately destroyed as a result. Almost at the exact same moment, within the myriad-depth devilish abyss on the Seven Spirit Islands, a tall and broad shadowy humanoid figure abruptly opened its eyes. The humanoid figure was seated on the platform that Han Li had used many years ago, and its entire body was enshrouded under devilish chi as an extremely surprised look surfaced on its face. It suddenly thrust its hand into its sleeve, and a blue bead immediately appeared over his palm. However, there was a clear crack running right down the center of the bead's smooth surface. Impossible, the restriction was broken. How did that man manage to find that palace so quickly? If I were in his shoes, I would be completely powerless to do anything. The humanoid figure murmured in a coarse voice that was tinged with incredulity and a hint of dejection. So be it. I wasn't counting on those three to do much for me anyway. However, I can't stay in this place for much longer. I have to complete this process of injecting devilish chi into my body, then find another obscure location to cultivate in. The humanoid figure murmured to itself before closing its eyes again, seemingly having managed to quickly compose itself. At this moment, Han Li had already pulled out a green jade vial from his storage pouch and poured 3 fragrant pills out onto his palm. He fed the 3 women a pill each before standing silently off to the side with his hands clasped behind his back. Only roughly 10 minutes had passed before Song Yu awakened first. Looks like your cultivation base has improved quite significantly, Martial Niece Song. You managed to wake up sooner than I expected. Before she had completely regained her consciousness, a familiar male voice suddenly sounded in her ears. Song Yu shuddered as she immediately came to her senses. She opened her eyes, and the first thing that she saw was Han Li appraising her with a hint of a smile on his face. Martial Uncle Han, wait no, are you really Martial Uncle Han? Song Yu exclaimed. Hee, you're pretty alert, aren't you, Martial Niece Song? I had to go through quite a bit of trouble to find this place. As for whether I'm the real Han Li or not, do you think I'm an imposter? Han Li chuckled calmly. So you really are Martial Uncle Han? Song Yu was still slightly conflicted. She was around 70% sure that this was indeed the real Han Li, but she still didn't dare to completely trust her judgment. Han Li smiled and didn't say anything. Instead, he merely waved a hand towards Song Yu. A dozen of so silver needles suddenly shot forth from various locations all over Song Yu's body, and the needles all flew into Han Li's grasp. Almost at the exact same moment, Song Yu could feel the magic power in her body resume free circulation. An ecstatic expression immediately appeared on her face. Right at this moment, Mu Paling and Liu Yu also woke up one after the other. They were also startled by the sight of Han Li. However, Mu Paling was able to immediately verify Han Li's identity through the use of the restriction in her spiritual sense, and she hurriedly rose to her feet before extending an elated curtsy toward Han Li. Upon seeing this, Liu Yu and Song Yu were convinced that this was the real Han Li, and they also rose to their feet to extend respectful curtsies. Was it my missing second nascent soul who captured the 3 of you? Han Li asked. Master, have you already encountered the nascent soul? Liu Yu blurted out upon hearing this. If I'd encountered it already, would I still be asking you this question? Han Li said in a calm voice as he also extracted the silver needles from Liu Yu and Mu Paling's bodies. Han Li's were rather perplexing to Mu Paling's trio. If he hadn't encountered the black-robed figure from before, then how was he able to immediately identify the second nascent soul as the culprit? In the end, Liu Yu repressed her confusion and replied, the one who captured us was indeed your missing second nascent soul, Master. Also, the nascent soul has possessed a body and possesses a mid-nascent soul stage cultivation base. A reminiscent look appeared on her face as she spoke. It possessed a body. Tell me what that body looks like. Han Li seemed to have been intrigued upon hearing this. At this point, the 2 golden lightning worms had already cleared out the surrounding black mist, and they shot forth through the air before disappearing into Han Li's body. The 3 women were stunned by Han Li's proficient mastery in manipulating lightning. At their core formation stage cultivation bases, they were already able to manifest their techniques into different forms. However, they were far from being able to manipulate those techniques as if it were second nature, as was clearly the case with Han Li. After calming her emotions, Liu Yu began to describe the physical appearance of the black-robed figure. Han Li only had to listen for a brief while to determine that the second nascent soul really had possessed that sovereign devil corpse. His expression remained calm, but he was feeling grave internally. If it weren't for the blood moon spirit-seeking technique that he had mastered from the Great Development Treasure Scriptures, it really would have been very difficult for him to find Mu Paling's trio. This second nascent soul knew him extremely well, so he definitely couldn't allow it to remain on the loose. Otherwise, it would surely come back to bite him someday. With that in mind, after hearing Liu Yu's description, he immediately instructed, "The three of you, leave this place right away and return to the sect. Seeing as this second nascent soul has already returned to the heavenly south region, I'm definitely going to have to capture it. I have to search carefully through this inner valley, and it's best if I did that alone. Marshal Uncle Han, that nascent soul's cultivation base is not inferior to yours. You should recruit some more assistants before you attempt to capture it. Otherwise, Marshal Uncle Han, your cultivation base." Song Yu had unconsciously swept her spiritual sense toward Han Li, and her expression immediately changed drastically. Upon hearing Song Yu's startled voice, Mu Paling and Liu Yu also assessed Han Li's cultivation base with their spiritual sense, upon which they were also naturally given a massive surprise. Only after a long while did Mu Paling manage to somewhat recover from her shock, and she asked with an incredulous expression, "My lord, you're already a great cultivator now. I forgot that the three of you aren't yet aware of this. My great cultivator celebratory ceremony was held half a year ago, and I'm already the grand elder of the sect now, so taking care of a mid-nascent soul's second nascent soul won't be an issue for me," Han Li explained with a faint smile. The three women were naturally ecstatic upon hearing this, and they immediately offered their congratulatory words. Han Li accepted their congratulations with a smile before urging them to leave again. On this occasion, neither of the three female cultivators had any objections. After extending a final curtsy to Han Li, all three of them were on their way. A short while later, three streaks of light shot forth from within the lava lake and departed from the inner valley. Meanwhile, Han Li remained within the cave and decided to wait here for a few days. This was such an obscure location, so if the second nascent soul was only temporarily away to do something, it would definitely return soon. Otherwise, it had to be residing elsewhere within the valley or had left the Devil Fall Valley altogether. In the end, Han Li waited in the cave for 7 days, but the wood spirit nascent didn't return. Thus, he decided to conclude this waiting game and left the cave. He then released all of the tens of thousands of gold-devouring beetles in his spirit beast pouch to scour through the entirety of the inner valley. He was unable to find the second nascent soul through his efforts, yet he was able to discover many ancient treasures left behind by cultivators of the distant past. Even though these treasures were completely useless to him and couldn't even compare to a spirit treasure replica like his Triflame fan, they would still be considered to be very rare in a place like the heavenly south region. However, Han Li couldn't bring himself to feel any joy over these discoveries. He had discovered traces of the second nascent soul's activity during this process, and many of the cave abodes left behind by ancient cultivators were already completely empty, having clearly been looted recently. Han Li could now confirm that the second nascent soul had most likely departed from the inner valley with those treasures. This was quite a troublesome prospect for him. However, upon careful contemplation, he discovered that the second nascent soul wasn't actually completely untraceable. The second nascent soul's ultimate objective was to devour his soul and take over his body, so it would clearly be fixated on improving its cultivation base until it became more powerful than Han Li. According to the descriptions provided by the three women, after possessing the sovereign devil corpse, the second nascent soul had been specializing in cultivating the profound yin arts. If it wanted to cultivate the profound yin devilish qi to its maximal extent, it could use a shortcut like performing a blood sacrifice to drastically improve its cultivation base. However, this method was not without its side effects. In most cases, anyone who dabbled in such sinister secret techniques would experience the progression in their cultivation base tapering off following this initial spurt, then find them unable to progress altogether. As such, the method described in the profound yin arts, during which one injected devilish qi into their body to enhance cultivation progress, was the best option for the second nascent soul. Using such a method to forcibly inject devilish qi into one's body could allow a devil cultivator to break through bottlenecks in an extremely short time, thereby significantly enhancing their cultivation base. However, this method also had accompanying repercussions. At best, The cultivator's body and appearance would be altered by the devilish chi through a process known as devilification, and at worst, one could completely lose their sanity and be reduced to half-human, half-devil abomination of a creature. As such, this was an extremely perilous method to employ for normal cultivators. However, this risk didn't apply to the second nascent soul. It had possessed a devil corpse, and it knew the cultivation method stipulated in the Great Development Technique, thereby allowing it to be able to much more effectively resist the repercussions that employing the method may have on its sanity. Thus, the risk involved was significantly minimized. Back when the second nascent soul had left him, it was still only at the early nascent soul stage, yet it had already progressed to the mid-nascent soul stage in such a short time. Unless it had stumbled upon some other miraculous opportunity, it may have already employed this method. This Devilfall Valley was the place where the ancient devil had emerged from countless years ago, so it wouldn't be a surprise at all if some places had residual devilish chi. Han Li sat and meditated on the summit of a certain mountain for a day and a night, constantly considering the second nascent soul's situation and attempting to predict its next step. In the end, he really was able to strike the nail on the head. The myriad depth devilish abyss. Han Li abruptly opened his eyes as he murmured to himself in a cold voice. Azure light then erupted over his body as he shot forth into the distance. 2 days later, Han Li had already departed from the Devilfall Valley and was heading toward the Seven Spirit Islands at an incredible speed. According to the profound yin arts, it would take around a year to complete the elementary stage of the process, during which one injected devilish chi into their body. He didn't want to get there too late and have the second nascent soul escape in advance. Almost at the exact same time, the black-robed figure within the myriad depth devilish abyss realized that Han Li may have predicted its whereabouts. However, it was at a crucial juncture in its cultivation and was unable to leave the myriad depth devilish abyss. Furthermore, due to the fact that the nascent soul was afraid of its location being leaked, it had concealed itself throughout the entire journey from the Devilfall Valley to the myriad depth devilish abyss, interacting with no cultivators along the way. As such, it had missed out on hearing an extremely important piece of information, and was still unaware of the fact that Han Li had reached the late nascent soul stage. It was no surprise that the nascent soul had neglected to consider this possibility. After all, even Han Li himself had thought that it would take him at least 200 to 300 years to progress to the late nascent soul stage when he had traveled to the Great Jin. The second nascent soul had clearly failed to predict that Han Li would suddenly, miraculously advance to the late nascent soul stage. As such, it was still calculating Han Li's speed based on what it would expect from a mid-nascent soul cultivator. According to its estimations, even if Han Li managed to immediately identify that it was in the myriad depth devilish abyss, it would still take him 2 months to get to this place. Meanwhile, it was already at the final stage of injecting devilish chi into its body, and it would only take just over a month for it to complete the process. As such, the nascent soul was feeling very uneasy, but it still decided to take a risk and remain in the myriad depth devilish abyss. After all, if it were to fail on this occasion, it would be extremely difficult for it to return to the myriad depth devilish abyss now that Han Li was aware of its plan. Thus, the nascent soul had arrived at its final decision. It was going to remain in the myriad depth devilish abyss for 1.5 months. By that point, regardless of whether it had succeeded or not, it was going to immediately depart from the abyss. With half a month as a buffer, it would ensure that it would escape before Han Li's arrival. With that in mind, the nascent soul managed to calm itself down and continued to absorb devilish chi into its body. However, after reaching the late nascent soul stage, Han Li was capable of traveling more than twice as fast as he did back at the mid-nascent soul stage, thereby completing a journey that should have taken more than 2 months in just a month. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. He had arrived at the Seven Spirit Islands. In the past, Wei Wuya and the others had gifted him with one of these 7 islands, Spirit Turtle Island, for his efforts in suppressing the devilish chi, and he had passed the island directly onto the sect. As such, there should be drifting cloud sect disciples based on that island. With that in mind, Han Li was no longer in a hurry to reach the myriad depth devilish abyss. Instead, he headed straight for Spirit Turtle Island. A streak of azure light flashed through the air, and he descended on a small mountain on the island. He sat down with his legs crossed on a massive rock, before releasing his immensely powerful spiritual sense. The island, which was several hundred kilometers in size, was instantly entirely scanned through by his spiritual sense, and at the same time, he had discovered two cultivator settlements. Han Li's lips twitched, and he said something in an extremely quiet voice before remaining expressionlessly on the spot. Meanwhile, there were two locations on Spirit Turtle Island that had been cast into a complete frenzy. A short while later, two groups of cultivators shot forth from two different directions, directly toward the mountain that Han Li was resting on. Han Li showed no intention of getting up, and merely looked up indifferently at these cultivators. All of a sudden, a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes. At this moment, the two groups of cultivators had already reached the air above the mountain, and after identifying Han Li, all of them hurriedly descended from above. "We pay our respects to Grand Elder Han." All of the cultivators stepped forward and extended respectful bows. The two people leading the respective groups were both core formation cultivators, one of which was a yellow-robed man with small eyes and thick eyebrows, while the other was a woman who appeared to be just over 30 years of age. The dozen or so cultivators accompanying them were all also at the foundation establishment stage. "So it really is you. Long time no see. It seems like you're also reached the core formation stage." Han Li suddenly turned to the yellow-robed cultivator with a smile. The yellow-robed man's face immediately paled after Han Li identified him, and he stuttered unsteadily. "I wasn't aware of your true identity during our previous encounter, so please forgive me if I offended you in any way, Grand Elder Han." The core formation stage woman was quite surprised to see this. This senior martial brother Q of hers was normally a very smooth talker, so why was it that he had been reduced to such a stuttering mess? Furthermore, it sounded as if he had been acquainted with the Grand Elder since a long time ago. The woman's heart was filled with confusion, but she didn't dare to ask any questions. A hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face. "It's not your fault. I concealed my cultivation base back then for my own purposes, so I certainly don't plan to blame you for anything. However, I really am rather surprised that you were able to progress to the core formation stage. How are your other martial brothers doing?" This yellow-robed cultivator was none other than Q Huan, the Drifting Cloud Sect cultivator who had invited Han Li to hunt for snowcloud foxes with him many years ago. The aptitude of his spiritual roots was very average, yet he had managed to progress all the way from the Qi condensation stage to the core formation stage. As such, Han Li was naturally quite surprised to see this. Han Li clearly recalled everything that had happened all those years ago, and a wry smile appeared on Q Huan's face upon seeing this as he replied, "Senior Martial Brother Wang and the others weren't as lucky as I am. They were unable to even progress to the Foundation establishment stage, and passed away many years ago." "I see. Their aptitude was quite mediocre, so it's no surprise that they were unable to progress to the Foundation establishment stage. Looks like you encountered some brilliant opportunities, Martial Nephew Q," Han Li sighed. "Over 100 years ago, I unintentionally consumed an unknown spirit herb, and my cultivation base progressed at a phenomenal rate thereafter," Q Huan explained with a slightly sheepish smile. You're quite a lucky man, Martial Nephew Q. However, I'm not here to catch up and reminisce about old times today. I have some questions to ask you all." Han Li suddenly adopted a serious expression. "We'll be sure to tell you everything we know, Grand Elder Han," the woman replied obediently. Even if Han Li wasn't the Grand Elder of the Drifting Cloud Sect, he was still the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, so he had to be treated with the utmost respect. "I just wanted as if any of you have noticed any abnormalities with the devilish abyss seal on the 7 Spirit Islands," Han Li inquired. The woman faltered momentarily before replying, "The seal? It seems to be fine. Our patrol teams from the 7 islands guard the seal in shifts, and no abnormalities have been reported to us." "What do you mean by this, Martial Uncle Han?" Han Li's brows furrowed upon hearing this. "The seal is guarded in shifts. Doesn't that mean you won't know if something's amiss when patrol teams from other islands are on duty?" Han asked with a dark expression. Q Huan and the woman glanced at each other, and the former could only muster up his courage as he admitted, "Unless the other islands go to the trouble of reporting these matters to us, I'm afraid that this is indeed the case." However, to their surprise, Han Li wasn't enraged upon hearing this. Instead, a hint of light flashed through his eyes as he suddenly patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, producing a set of formation plates and formation flags of different colors. Take 36 disciples with you and head to the entrance of the abyss straight away, then set up this malevolent heavenly formation. I'm going to be making a trip to the abyss. If anything tries to come out, make sure to trap it with this formation. I don't expect you to kill it, just make sure it doesn't get away, Han Li instructed calmly. Kui Huan and the woman were very surprised to hear this, but they still immediately agreed. There's no time to waste. Pick your disciples quickly, then set up the formation as soon as you can. I'm going ahead to the abyss first. Hopefully, this is just a false alarm. Han Li delivered a final set of instructions before tossing the formation tools toward the two core formation cultivators and rising into the air. Before the two of them had a chance to reply, azure light appeared over his body as he shot forth into the distance, heading directly for the seal on the devilish abyss. The woman and Kui Huan hurriedly bowed in his direction, before immediately pulling out their voice transmission talismans, instructing all of the disciples on the island to immediately assemble. A short while later, 36 cultivators were picked out, and the two core formation cultivators led them toward the abyss while carrying the formation tools. As this was an instruction from Han Li, they didn't dare to delay in the slightest. At this moment, Han Li had already reached the entrance of the abyss. The massive vortex of the past had now been reduced to only around 500 to 600 feet wide. Furthermore, there were a dozen or so massive stone pillars distributed around the vortex. The pillars were constructed from an unknown material that was like metal, but also like wood, and were able to float in a completely stationary manner in the surrounding seawater. Beams of white spiritual light were radiating from the stone pillars, creating a white light barrier that completely sealed the vortex within. Han Li hovered above the light barrier and examined it with narrowed eyes. There were 7 or 8 cultivators standing behind Han Li, one of which was a red-robed core formation cultivator, who asked tentatively, "Senior Han, as you can see, the seal is completely unscathed. Could it be that the information you received was perhaps incorrect? The cultivators from our 7 islands have been constantly keeping an eye on this place, and we've never let our guards drop." The remaining Foundation establishment cultivators were standing even further away, not even daring to breathe too loudly. "HMPH, I know at least half a dozen methods to infiltrate this seal without damaging it. It's not a difficult task to get past you guys," Han Li replied coldly without even turning his head. The red-robed cultivator could only give a wry smile in response. "Disciples from my drifting cloud sect are going to arrive to set a formation soon in order to fortify the entrance. All you have to do is cooperate with them. There won't be any issues, will there?" Han Li asked coldly. "Not at all, Senior. Are you really going to enter through the seal?" the red-robed cultivator asked in a hesitant manner. Han Li looked up into the sky and replied without any hesitation, "Of course I'm going to be making a trip into the abyss. Otherwise, why would I come here in person? Now's the time when the devilish chi is at its most feeble state, so it's the best time for me to enter the abyss." The time was at exactly noon, and the scorching sun had reached its highest point in the sky. The red-robed cultivator also looked up at the dazzling sun, and an enlightened expression appeared on his face. "All right, all of you can go back to what you were doing. I'm going to enter the abyss now." Han Li didn't wish to delay any longer. His sleeve rustled and a ball of 3-colored flames appeared in his hand, transforming into the triflame fan. Han Li then waved the fan gently through the air, and runes began to appear on the fan as 3-colored flames appeared over its surface. Han Li's body swayed and he shot forth directly toward the light barrier as a streak of azure light. At the same time, he waved his triflame fan toward the light barrier, and the fan had seemingly transformed into a peerlessly sharp blade of fire amid a resounding boom. The blade of fire was able to easily tear a rift that was around 10 feet wide into the light barrier, and inky black devilish chi erupted from within before attempting to permeate through the air. The red-robed cultivator's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, while all of the Foundation establishment cultivators let loose involuntary cries of surprise. However, Han Li was prepared well in advance, as he viciously swatted his other sleeve downward. A burst of azure light was immediately sent sweeping downward, instantly repressing the leaking devilish chi with his immense spiritual pressure. Immediately thereafter, a burst of azure light flashed as Han Li flew into the abyss. The white light barrier quickly sealed over again, and not even so much as a single wisp of devilish chi managed to escape. The red-robed cultivator heaved an internal sigh of relief, and at the same time, a self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. With the #1 great cultivator of the Heavenly South region present, there was no need for him to be so nervous. Right at this moment, one of the Foundation establishment cultivators standing behind him suddenly yelled, "Marshal Uncle, look." The red-robed cultivator faltered upon hearing this, before turning toward the direction that the disciple was pointing toward. There in the distance, several tens of streaks of light were hurtling toward them. They're drifting cloud sect cultivators. Looks like Senior Han is quite serious about this. Could it be that there really has been some powerful devil that has snuck into the abyss? The red-robed cultivator murmured with a complex expression on his face. Mid the vast expanse of pitch-black devilish chi within the abyss, Han Li had already summoned his divine devil-bane lightning to shield himself. At this moment, he was advancing toward the deepest point in the abyss amid a series of rumbling thunderclaps. The golden arcs of lightning around his body intertwined incessantly with the devilish chi in the air, and the latter was constantly being eradicated in Han Li's wake. Han Li paid this no heed as he made a series of hand seals over and over again, unleashing a secret technique from the profound nascent formation arts. 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet. Han Li maintained the output of the secret technique without pause, but he detected nothing within his spiritual sense. As he delved deeper and deeper into the abyss, his expression gradually darkened. After reaching depths of around 70,000 to 80,000 feet, even he was beginning to doubt his own judgment. Could it be that his prediction had been incorrect? Could it be that the second nascent soul had never come here and had instead gone elsewhere to cultivate? Just as these thoughts were flashing through Han Li's mind, his expression suddenly changed as he came to an abrupt halt. A grave expression appeared on his face as he made an alternate hand seal. At the same time, he began to chant something in a low voice, and he stared directly up ahead with an unblinking gaze and a blue light shimmering in his eyes. All of a sudden, a peculiar look appeared on his face, and he appeared to be rather uncertain. After a brief hesitation, he sprang into action again. However, on this occasion, Han Li seemed to be very clear on where his target was, and his movements were a lot more decisive and purposeful. He descended a further 3,000 to 4,000 feet, upon he heard a low feral snarl. He pursed his lips and slowed down significantly in his descent. At the same time, he tightened his grip around his triflame fan. The blue light shimmering within Han Li's eyes became even more dazzling as he stared intently into the devilish chi down below with an unblinking gaze. At Han Li's current cultivation base, if he were to unleash his bright-side spirit eyes with all his might, he would already be able to see up to 1,000 feet away in the myriad-depth devilish abyss. However, things became rather blurry at a distance of more than 500 feet away. Around 1,000 feet below Han Li, there was a tall and broad black figure that was unleashing an almighty roar. Han Li looked down with his spirit eyes and stared directly into the black figure's vicious crimson eyes. A chill ran down Han Li's spine. The crimson eyes down below were filled with violence and brutality, and they were not the eyes of a normal human being. Instead, those eyes belonged to a crazed and bloodthirsty wild beast. Han Li was still wondering whether the crazed being down below was the target for his trip when the thunderous roar came to an abrupt halt, and the black figure down below swayed before disappearing into the surround devilish chi. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, but he merely drew a silver shield from within his sleeve in a calm and unhurried manner. The shield then transformed into a silver light barrier that enshrouded his entire body within. Just as he had set up those defensive measures, the devilish chi behind him suddenly began to surge as a hirsute black devilish arm shot forth like lightning, crashing straight into the light barrier. A thunderous boom erupted, and the devilish claws embedded themselves over half a foot into the silver light barrier. Han Li felt the barrier of light around him tremor violently as a burst of immense force came sweeping toward him. His expression changed slightly, and only after striding forward 2 small steps was he able to absorb the force of this fearsome impact. At the same time, he waved a hand through the air, and a golden sword that was several feet in length appeared. He wrapped his fingers firmly around the hilt of the sword before lashing out rapidly behind him without even turning his head. Golden light flashed, and half of a hirsute arm was severed by the golden sword. The black figure roared as it stumbled backward a few steps before righting itself. However, it continued to glower at Han Li with crazed ferocity in its crimson eyes. Han Li turned around and examined the black figure before heaving a faint sigh. "So it really is you. It appears you failed in your attempt to inject devilish chi into your body and have lost your sanity from devilification. The black figure was only around 100 feet away from him, so he was naturally able to catch a clear glimpse of it. The devilish creature bore a strong resemblance to Han Li's sovereign devil corpse, but most of its black robes had been torn away, revealing large swaths for long corpse fur. There were also inky black fist-sized scales that had grown over some of his vital regions, and those scales were shimmering with a sinister light amid the darkness. The skull-like face of the sovereign devil corpse had been enshrouded under a thin layer of black chi, and he could indistinctly make out a set of extremely twisted features beyond the veil of devilish chi. Not a single drop of blood was dripping from the devil corpse's severed arm, and it appeared that it had no blood within its body at all. It was emitting a low snarl from its mouth and staring intently at the golden sword in Han Li's hand, but it didn't charge toward Han Li again. Han Li's powerful sword strike had planted the seed of wariness in its heart. Hence, even though it wanted nothing better than to tear Han Li into shreds with its bare hands, its self-preservation instincts were preventing it from attacking. There was a storage pouch hanging from its waist, but it appeared to have completely lost its intelligence due to its devilification, to the extent that it didn't even have the mental capacity to summon weapons to use in battle. It turned out that even though the devilish chi in the myriad-depth devilish abyss wasn't as potent as that which was sealed within the Kunwu mountain, its degree of devilification was still far beyond the second nascent soul's anticipation. Furthermore, the second nascent soul had predicted that Han Li would be arriving at the abyss soon, and in its urgency, it increased the influx of devilish chi into its body during the final stage of its cultivation. The second nascent soul did indeed possess the great development technique, yet it was too busy cultivating the profound yin arts and had only reached the second layer of the great development technique. As such, even though its spiritual sense was more powerful than other cultivators of the same cultivation base, it was still quite a stretch to expect it to be able to withstand the prolonged influx of devilish chi. As a result, the devil corpse was able to withstand the devilification process, yet the nascent soul was unable to do so and succumbed in the end, thereby losing its sanity and intelligence. At this point, the devil corpse was nothing but a half-devil creature that was ruled over solely by its instincts and propensity for slaughter. It was not that much superior compared to a demon beast that yet to attain intelligence. Han Li carefully examined his opponent and was finally able to verify that it had indeed lost all of its intelligence. He heaved a long sigh of relief upon making his observation, but at the same time, he found this development to be rather amusing. He had regarded the second nascent soul to be an extremely powerful enemy and had flown for a consecutive month without rest to get here, only to be faced with such a farcical scenario, one that left him rather speechless. However, it would undoubtedly be a lot easier to subdue such a buffoon of an opponent, and capturing it should be a piece of cake. With that in mind, Han Li immediately lifted his hand without any hesitation, raising the triflame fan high in the air. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4F6. Seeing as his opponent had lost all of its intelligence, there was no need for him to hold back. All he had to do was forcibly incinerate its body with his triflame fan. Without a body, his second nascent soul would naturally be forced to surrender. Just as three colored flames were appearing over the surface of the triflame fan, the devil corpse suddenly let loose an almighty roar. Gusts of devilish wind were swept up around it, following which extremely pure devilish chi abruptly converged toward its severed arm before rapidly taking shape. An incredible scene then unfolded. The devil corpse's severed arm was completely healed in the blink of an eye, and it was as if Han Li had never even struck it. Instantaneous regeneration. Han Li faltered upon seeing this, but a cold smile then appeared on his face as he injected even more spiritual power into his triflame fan. Instantaneous regeneration was a rare ability, but he had killed more than one or two demon beasts with that inherent ability. As long as he could completely destroy its body with overwhelming power, there would be nothing left for it to regenerate. A sharp cry rang out as a fire raven that was several feet in size flew out from the fan. There were three colored runes revolving around its body as it hurtled directly toward the devil corpse. In the face of these devastating three-colored flames, all of the surrounding devilish chi was instantly reduced to nothingness. The devil corpse also seemed to have sensed that something was amiss. If the second nascent soul had retained its intelligence, it would definitely be unwilling to face such an immensely powerful attack head-on. However, the devil corpse's killing intent only seemed to have been intensified by the sight of these fearsome flames, and it let loose an almighty roar as the surrounding devilish chi surged toward it in a frenzy. The devil corpse immediately grew several feet in height. It then opened its mouth and blasted forth a pillar of inky black light, heading directly toward the three-colored fire raven. An earth-shattering boom erupted. Within the depths of the devilish abyss, a three-colored ball of light and a ball of black light exploded in unison, and both sides seemed to be evenly matched in power, thereby resulting in an intense impasse. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. The Triflame fan was so powerful that even nascent soul cultivators wouldn't dare to take its attack head-on. Even though he was only unleashing a portion of the Triflame fan's power, it still came as quite a surprise to him that the mid-nascent soul stage devil corpse was able to stand up against Ist. He looked on at the clash taking place nearby, and his eyes narrowed slightly. The three-colored runes revolved around the flames, flashed violently, before the flames were finally able to overpower the black ball of light, slowly engulfing it before surging toward the devil corpse. A vicious light appeared in the devil corpse's eyes upon seeing this, and it sucked the nearby devilish chi into its mouth in preparation to blast forth another black pillar of light. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and a pair of azure and white wings appeared on his back following a loud thunderclap. These were his recently refined thunderstorm wings. The wings on his back flapped gently, and his entire body disappeared amid a light breeze. In the next instant, an azure arc of lightning flashed behind the devil corpse. Han Li emerged soundlessly from within the arc of lightning before aiming a devastating punch toward the devil corpse's back. A massive shimmering azure fist appeared in the air before hurtling toward the devil corpse from behind. The devil corpse was completely caught off guard and sent flying amid a loud thump, flying headfirst into the vast expanse of three-colored flames up ahead. The devil immediately let loose a roar of fury and the utmost horror as bursts of inky black devilish chi surfaced over its body in an attempt to keep the flames at bay. However, the three-colored flames enshrouded the devil corpse's body right before Han Li's expressionless eyes, rapidly brushing aside the black chi before forcing the devil corpse to disintegrate while it was completely powerless to resist. The three-colored runes flashed, and the devil corpse was completely engulfed. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he prepared himself to snuff out the three-colored flames and capture the second nascent soul within. However, right at this moment, the three-colored flames suddenly shuddered violently. A ball of crimson light suddenly exploded within, forcibly blasting a hole into the flames. A streak of black light then shot forth from within, reaching a height of over 300 feet above Han Li after just a few flashes. Han Li's heart jolted with surprise as he focused his gaze upward. He discovered that there was a green nascent soul enshrouded within the black light, holding an inky black flag within its little hand. It was none other than Han Li's second nascent soul. The nascent soul looked back at Han Li with a cold expression, and the clarity in its eyes suggested that it had completely recovered its intelligence. Han Li harumphed coldly as he immediately flapped his thunderstorm wings, upon which he abruptly disappeared from the spot. The second nascent soul's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and it tossed the small black flag down below. As it did so, it made a hand seal before stabbing a finger toward the flag. The ghost-sifting banner that Han Li had repaired many years ago revolved through the air as black light flashed violently over its surface. It then self-detonated amid a resounding boom. Countless strands of black light shot forth to create a dense net, encompassing an area with a radius of several kilometers below the nascent soul. The second nascent soul then let loose a long cry as it turned and flew upward with all its might. Beneath the black net, an arc of azure lightning suddenly appeared out of thin air, following which Han Li's figure was revealed. He looked at the descending black net, then up at the second nascent soul, which had almost disappeared from his line of sight, and a cold expression flashed through his eyes. He abruptly flapped a sleeve through the air, sending a streak of dazzling golden light slashing into the black net. However, the black net merely wobbled slightly, yet showed no sign of unraveling. Han Li's brows furrowed as he pointed a finger toward the golden light. The golden light swayed, and a layer of golden lightning arcs appeared slashing toward the black net again. Following a thunderous boom, a large hole was finally blasted into the net. Han Li immediately hurtled through the hole, transforming into a streak of azure light as he rushed directly toward the second nascent soul. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the myriad-depth devilish abyss, there were several tens of cultivators standing around the seal with formation flags and formation plates in their hands. All of them wore expressions of rapt focus as spiritual light of different colors shimmered from their respective formation tools, indicating that the formation had already been activated. All of a sudden, a resounding boom erupted from within the white seal, followed by a violent tremor. A massive inky black sword that was several tens of feet in length punctured through the seal before inflicting a gash upon it that was over 100 feet in length. A ball of black light then shot forth from within. Activate the formation. Kui Huan and the women were focusing intently on the seal, and they were able to react immediately as soon as the second nascent soul threatened to escape. The 36 drifting cloud sect disciples tossed their formation plates and formation flags into the air in unison. Brilliant spiritual light immediately radiated from those formation tools as layers of five-colored light emerged before sweeping downward. The ball of black light was completely caught off guard, and before it knew it, it had been ensnared within the light. It was naturally none other than the second nascent soul that was situated within the black light. When it had been engulfed by the flames of the triflame fan, it had unconsciously expelled all of the devilish it had absorbed into its body as a defensive measure to save itself. As such, the devilish chi was reduced to nothingness by the flames, and even more of the devil corpse had been incinerated. As a result, however, the nascent soul was able to unintentionally reverse its devilification and return to its senses. With Han Li's memories to guide it, it immediately detonated the devilish tool, the crimson blood sword, to break through the three-colored flames. At the sight of Han Li unleashing his thunderstorm wings, the second nascent soul could only grit its teeth and detonate the ghost-sifting banner as well. As expected, the detonation of these two treasures worked extremely well, and due to the fact that Han Li was taken by surprise, the second nascent soul really was able to sneak away. However, it knew that these tactics wouldn't be able to impede Han Li for very long, so it had already made up its mind. As soon as it escaped from the devilish abyss, it was going to unleash its nascent soul teleportation technique and escape to one of the 7 spirit islands. In preparation for this exact situation, it had set up an obscure hiding spot on that island well in advance. It had even used several special treasures to set up an extremely advanced formation that would conceal its aura, and it was confident that the formation would be undetectable to Han Li's spiritual sense. However, never would the second nascent soul have thought that the lone wolf, Han Li, would recruit the assistance of others on this occasion. Even though the formation outside had only been set up by low-grade cultivators, the formation itself was extremely powerful, and it had run right into the trap. The second nascent soul was ensnared within the light, and was naturally extremely shocked and enraged. It swung its little arms wildly at the light around it, unleashing streaks of black sword chi that fanned out around it. However, this five-colored light was very troublesome in that it would be torn apart easily by the sword chi, but those gashes would seal over extremely quickly, affording the second nascent soul no opportunity for escape. The second nascent soul's expression changed drastically upon making this discovery, and it abruptly rubbed its hands together before flinging them outward at the same time. 2 pillars of black light immediately erupted forth before transforming into 2 massive swords that were each over 10 feet in length, both of which came crashing downward with devastating might. The cultivators that were desperately holding the formation together were finally unable to withstand the assault any longer. Following 2 rumbling booms, a hole that was several feet in diameter was blasted into the 5-colored light. Spiritual light flashed around the hole as it attempted to seal itself over again, but the hole was simply too large, and there was insufficient magic power flowing into the formation from all of the cultivators, so it wasn't able to immediately close. The second nascent soul was ecstatic upon seeing this, and its body swayed as it immediately disappeared after unleashing its teleportation technique. In the next instant, black light flashed and the green nascent soul had appeared outside the 5-colored light. It aimed a vicious glare at the cultivators around it before making a hand seal to teleport away from this place. However, right at this moment, a gentle breeze suddenly blew past it, following which a humanoid figure appeared. Crap, the second nascent soul immediately teleported away without any hesitation. The humanoid figure that had appeared was naturally none other than Han Li, who had just emerged from the devilish abyss with his thunderstorm wings spread wide open. His expression darkened as the second nascent soul attempted to flee, and a cold harumph escaped from his mouth. A thin gash suddenly appeared on his glabella, following which a cloud of black chi rapidly billowed out from within. The black chi then materialized into an unsettling pitch-black eyeball that was staring into the distance. A streak of black light shot forth, striking a certain spot in the air over 200 feet away in a flash. The black light then exploded, and the stumbling figure of the second nascent soul appeared out of thin air. It raised its head to look up at Han Li, and there was incredulity and horror etched all over its little face. Han Li chuckled coldly as he opened his mouth to expel a small azure cauldron. The cauldron was clasped in his hand, following which the white and azure wings on his back flapped gently, and his entire body disappeared like a mild breeze. The second nascent soul knew that it was in a heap of trouble upon seeing this, and it immediately attempted to flee the scene as a streak of black light. However, right at this moment, a clump of azure threads suddenly shot from thin air, as if they had been waiting for the second nascent soul this entire time, and the second nascent soul was immediately bound in a tight azure cocoon. The second nascent soul was greatly startled by this development, and it unleashed countless streaks of black sword chi from all over its body to try and escape its cocoon. However, following a string of explosions and flashing black light, those azure threads remained completely unscathed. The second nascent soul was truly horrified now. Just as it was about to unleash another secret technique to try and escape, an azure arc of lightning flashed, and Han Li appeared out of thin air with a small cauldron hovering over his palm. The sight of the second nascent soul's desperate attempts to escape brought a cold expression onto his face, and he gently flicked a finger toward the small cauldron. A faint sound rang out as the cauldron's lid flew off on its own, and a burst of azure light erupted into the sky. The azure light resonated with the azure threads that had bound the second nascent soul, and those threads also began to emanate intense light. As they did so, the second nascent soul felt the cocoon tighten around its body, following which it was rendered completely unable to use its spiritual power. Following another flash of azure light, the azure cocoon shot forth and swept the powerless nascent soul into the small cauldron in the blink of an eye. Han Li then pointed at the cauldron, and the lid came flying down as a streak of azure light, sealing up the cauldron's opening again. Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief upon seeing this, and a smile finally appeared on his face. Even a late nascent soul great cultivator wouldn't be able to escape from within the heaven-void cauldron. Congratulations on completing your objective, Martial Uncle Han. Kui Huan and the women immediately approached Han Li to offer congratulatory words with fawning expressions on their faces. Han Li smiled and patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist to produce 2 white jade vials. He tossed the vials to Kui Huan and cautioned, you guys also contributed quite significantly during this process. There are some pills in this vial that'll be very helpful to your cultivation. Take them and split them up among yourself. Also, the security around the entrance of this devilish abyss must be tightened up. Otherwise, other devils could also sneak into it in the future. Kui Huan was ecstatic after catching the jade vials, and he offered, yes, I'll be sure to discuss this matter with the other sects and dedicate more effort into guarding this place. Martial Uncle, would you like to rest on Spirit Turtle Island for a couple of days before returning to the sect? There's no need for that. This place isn't very far away from the sect, and I have other matters to attend to, so I won't remain here any longer. Han Li shook his head before stowing his small cauldron away, then flying into the distance as a streak of azure light. Kui Huan and the woman bowed toward the direction that Han Li had departed in, and only after a long while did they stand up straight again. What kind of pills did Senior Han leave for you too? Any pills left behind by Senior Han must be quite potent, right? The red-robed cultivator approached them with his accompanying sect disciples, and he was looking at the jade vials in Kui Huan's hands with an envious expression on his face. I'm not sure of that myself, but I'm sure these pills are indeed quite extraordinary. I think we should focus on fortifying the seal here. Kui Huan gave a dry chuckle as white light flashed from his hand, and the 2 vials were stowed away. He was clearly unwilling to speak much about this matter. Even though the massive gash inflicted on the seal had been repaired, the spiritual light shimmering over its surface had clearly dimmed slightly. As such, the drifting cloud sect cultivators immediately flew toward the nearby stone pillars to fortify the seal again. The red-robed cultivator really wanted to know what pills were in those vials, yet he knew that it wouldn't be smart to press the issue. As such, He merely chuckled and also instructed the disciples behind him to assist in fortifying the seal as well. A ringing sound rang out from the dozen or so stone pillars in unison, and a layer of white spiritual light appeared over the surface of the seal as part of a gradual fortification process. Around half a month later, Han Li returned to the Dreamcloud Mountains. However, he didn't immediately return to the Drifting Cloud Sect. Instead, he returned directly to the interconnected peaks. However, when he opened the restriction and landed in front of the cave abode on the main peak, there was already a woman standing outside, waiting for him. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this white-robed woman. Liu Yu pays her respects to her master. The beautiful woman extended a respectful bow toward him with a serious look on her face. This woman was none other than his in-name disciple, Liu Yu. Han Li's brows furrowed as he asked, "You've been here this entire time?" Liu Yu cast a surreptitious glance at Han Li as she replied, "I'm not the only one here. Senior Martial Sister Song and Senior Martial Sister Mu are also here. We were slightly concerned about you, so we decided to take shifts waiting here for your return. My Senior Martial Sisters are currently with my Junior Martial Sister in her cave abode. It's just capturing my second nascent soul. With my current cultivation base, there's nothing to be concerned about. Does that mean all of you have met Kinner already?" Han Li asked in a seemingly casual manner. "Yes, we've all met Junior Martial Sister Tian. She's a very clever girl. It's no wonder that you would decide to take her under your wing, Master," Liu Yu replied with a dainty smile. Han Li raised an eyebrow and said in a nonchalant manner, "Kinner isn't the same as you three. She possesses the dragon cry physique, so she doesn't have much of a future in cultivation. I made her my disciple for another reason, and there's no need for you to try and probe me for answers." "I wouldn't dare to do that, Master." Liu Yu was elated to hear this, but an awkward expression appeared on her face from having her ploy exposed. Han Li stroked his chin and suddenly instructed in a serious voice, "Seeing as you're all here, gather the other three and come to my cave abode. I have something to say to all of you." "Yes, Master." Liu Yu's heart stirred slightly in response. Han Li nodded before waving a sleeve through the air, sending a burst of azure light sweeping toward the closed gate of his cave abode. A loud rumbling erupted as the stone gate slowly rose up, and Han Li's body swayed before he entered the cave abode. Meanwhile, Liu Yu transformed into a streak of white light and headed straight for Tian Kinner's cave abode. A short while later, Han Li sat on the main seat within the hall of his cave abode, and he was surrounded by four beauties, all of whom wore extremely respectful expressions and didn't dare to many a single sound. Only after Mu Paling's trio returned to the cave abode did they learn that not only had Han Li progressed to the late nascent soul stage, he was also the undisputed #1 cultivator of the Heavenly South region. The three women were quite shocked to hear these, and their awe and veneration toward Han Li were only compounded as a result. Letter 1D4 BB, letter 1D4 C7, letter 1D4 52, letter 1D6 26, letter 1D6 38, letter 1D4 52, letter 1D4 B8, letter 2134, letter 1D6 2E. And Li wore a cold expression on his face and was scolding Mu Paling's trio. "There's no need to worry about the second nascent soul. It's already been captured, and I'm going to erase its sentient will soon, then refine it into my second nascent soul again. However, the three of you sure are quite brave. Don't you know that the Inner Valley is an extremely dangerous place even for nascent soul cultivators? Martial Uncle Han, we only took the risk to venture into the Inner Valley as the illusionary spirit herb was of the utmost importance to us. We won't do something so reckless ever again," Song Yu explained with her hands clasped behind her back. Han Li had been acquainted with Song Yu even prior to reaching the nascent soul stage, so he couldn't bring himself to scold her any further. Instead, his brows furrowed as he asked, "Illusionary spirit herb. Are you trying to refine the illusionary destruction pill to assist in a breakthrough?" "Indeed, Master, that was our objective," Liu Yu replied in a truthful manner. "If that's the case, you don't need to go searching for the illusionary spirit herb anymore. I just so happen to have a vial of illusionary destruction pills with me. Excessive consumption of pills during breakthroughs isn't advisable, so 2 pills for each of you will be enough." Han Li patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and a small green vial appeared in his hand, which he casually tossed toward Liu Yu. This vial of pills was something that he had obtained from a certain nascent soul cultivator he had slain in the past. They served no use for him, so he decided to sell the three women a favor by giving it to them. Only after Liu Yu had reflexively caught the vial did Han Li's words register in her mind, and she immediately extended a gesture of gratitude toward Han Li in a shocked and elated manner. Song Yu and Mu Paling were also ecstatic as they extended grateful salutes. "There's no need for formalities, it's just a vial of pills. I called all of you here because I have a few things to tell you," Han Li said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We'll be sure to listen carefully, Marshal Uncle Han," Song Yu replied in a respectful voice. The other two women also adopted serious expressions in preparation to hear what Han Li had to say. "The three of you should know that I've never liked to meddle in the sect's affairs. However, as the Grand Elder of the sect now, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to continue in this manner. I've left all of the troublesome matters for our Marshal Uncle Lu to take care of, but I'll need a disciple to correspond with and assist him in overseeing the matters within the sect during my periods of seclusion. Liu Yu, would you be willing to take care of some matters within the sect in my place? Of course, I won't ask you to do this for me free of charge. I'll teach you some secret technique mantras and also reward you with a few treasures, all of which will make you one of the most powerful cultivators at your cultivation base. Even though you were forced to become an unnamed disciple of mine in the beginning, if you agree to undertake this duty, I can officially make you my disciple," Han Li offered with a meaningful look in his eyes. "Is that true, Master?" Liu Yu blurted out as her eyes lit up. Han Li smiled and answered her question with one of his own. "Would I lie to you at my current status?" "If that's the case, then I would be honored to accept this task," Liu Yu replied without any hesitation. Perhaps it was the prospect of attaining more power and influence within the drifting cloud sect that was alluring to her, or perhaps it was the idea of officially becoming Han Li's disciple that appealed to her. Maybe it was a combination of those two factors that prompted her to so readily agree to this arrangement. In any case, Han Li had achieved his first objective, and he nodded with a content expression. He waved his sleeve through the air, and a white jade slip appeared in his hand. He then pulled out a pair of green bracelets, a fiery ruler, and a shiny golden flying sword from his storage pouch, and bestowed all of those items upon her. Liu Yu accepted the jade slip and the treasures with both hands, and she bowed over and over again to express her gratitude with an overjoyed expression on her face. She didn't know that techniques were recorded within the jade slip, but just these ancient treasures alone were unimaginable treasures to her, and were more than enough to satisfy her. "Go and pay a visit to Senior Marshal Brother Lu. I'll inform him of this arrangement right away through a voice transmission," Han Li instructed. Liu Yu immediately nodded before departing following a final respectful salute. After she had left, Han Li flipped over his palm, and a voice transmission talisman appeared in his hand. He spoke a few words into the talisman before sending it on its way, and it disappeared into the distance in a flash as a streak of light. Everyone else looked on in silence, and no one dared to disrupt Han Li during this process. "Marshal Ni's Song, I also have something for you to do," Han Li said as he slowly turned to Song Yu. "Please enlighten me, Marshal Uncle Han," Song Yu immediately replied. Han Li paused for a moment before continuing. "It's not actually an extremely important matter. I was only hoping that you'd be able to keep an eye out for cultivators with inherently powerful spiritual sense from birth among the disciples recruited by the sect during the next few years. I want to take one as my disciple and instruct them in person. An inherently powerful spiritual sense from birth. Disciples of that nature are extremely rare, so I can't make any guarantees, but I'll do my best." Song Yu was a little hesitant after hearing this request. "It's all right, this is not an urgent matter. It's just something for you to keep in the back of your mind. I can see that you've already reached the peak of the mid-core formation stage. In that case, your chances of making a breakthrough by taking the illusionary destruction pill alone won't be very high. I also have a vial of yin essence pills here, which aren't as renowned, but they're extremely potent for female cultivators. You can try taking a few when attempting your breakthrough, Marshal Ni's Song." Han Li raised a hand as he spoke, and a small black vial appeared in his hand amid a flash of azure light, then flew soundlessly towards Song Yu. As expected, Song Yu had never heard of this obscure yin essence pill, but she certainly wasn't going to ignore a recommendation from a great cultivator like Han Li. Thus, an elated look appeared on her face, and she accepted the jade vial with words of gratitude. Han Li spoke with Song Yu for a bit longer before sending her on her way. He then turned his gaze toward Mu Paling. Mu Paling's body stiffened slightly in response, and she reflexively lowered her head as a faint blush appeared on porcelain-like skin. A complex expression appeared in Han Li's eyes as he asked in a gentle voice, "You've been my concubine for over a century now, right?" Mu Paling raised her head in the end and quietly replied, "That's right, my lord. Back when you first accepted me as your concubine, you had only just reached the nascent soul stage, but you're already a late nascent soul great cultivator now. Back when I had accepted you as my concubine, I had planned to use your virgin body to cultivate the copulation essence arts in order to assist me in my breakthroughs. However, I've since progressed at a rate that has been extraordinary even to me, reaching the mid-nascent soul stage, then the late nascent soul stage through alternative avenues, yet the copulation essence arts are only effective during nascent soul stage breakthroughs. My lord, are you banishing me from the interconnected peaks?" Mu Paling's features immediately paled. "Banish you? Of course not. However, you chose to become my concubine in the beginning mostly because you were forced to do so by your family. You're already a core formation cultivator now, so no one will be able to force you to do anything against your will. I also don't want to keep you by my side in such an ambiguous manner any longer. On one hand, it would be a waste of the best years of your life. On the other hand, Wanner is about to break free from the ice wall in the next few years, and I have to be able to give her a proper explanation of what's going on between us." Han Li's words faltered here. "So what do you plan on doing with me, my lord?" Mu Paling asked as she bit down on her lower lip. "It's quite simple. I'll give you two options, just like I did back then, and you can choose one of them. The first option is that I'll give you a materialistic reward for your efforts in cultivating the copulation essence arts for these past years. I'll then release you from the interconnected peaks, and you'll be completely free to marry anyone you like. In that case, we would be cutting all ties with one another. My lord, with your current reputation, even if you were to release me and vouch for my purity in person, which cultivator in the heavenly south region would dare to marry me?" Mu Paling murmured with a wry smile on her face. Han Li's brows also furrowed upon hearing this, but he continued, "The second option is quite simple as well. If you're truly serious about cultivation and would be willing to dedicate your life to it, I can allow you to continue to stay on the interconnected peaks. Officially, you'll still be known as my concubine, but I can treat you as a disciple and provide you some guidance in your cultivation path. Of course, your cultivation aptitude is actually quite good, so I can also get Wanner to make you an official disciple of hers. After all, Wanner's cultivation art is more suitable for female cultivators anyway, so perhaps you'll benefit more from her guidance." Han Li looked at Mu Paling with a calm expression and concluded, "Of course, there may still be some negative rumors spread about you, but this course of action will keep that to a minimum." Mu Paling fell silent after hearing the options presented by Han Li. Han Li didn't try to hurry her either, and merely waited patiently for her decision. After a prolonged silence, she suddenly asked, "Can I choose neither of those options?" "What do you mean by that?" Han Li's brows furrowed slightly. Following another brief silence, a decisive look appeared on Mu Paling's face as she said, "I want to become a true concubine of yours, my lord. I want to stay with you for the rest of my life." "You want to become my concubine? That won't work." Han Li's expression changed slightly as he shook his head. "Why? Do you despise me for my lowly cultivation base, or find me unsightly to look at, my lord?" Mu Paling's face paled even further. "That's not the case. You already possess a mid-core formation stage cultivation base, which isn't lowly by any means. Your beauty also ranks in the top 10 among all female cultivators that I've ever seen," Han Li sighed. "Then why are you rejecting me? Are you afraid that Elder Nangong won't agree to this arrangement?" Mu Paling asked. After a brief silence, Han Li heaved a resigned sigh and said, "That's only one factor of consideration. The most concerning thing to me is that I'm completely dedicated to my pursuit of the Great Tao, and going into seclusion for several decades at a time will be a regular occurrence for me in the future. It would be fine if you could reach the nascent soul stage and attain a lifespan of over 1,000 years, but if you can't, then you'll most likely only be able to see me a few times in between my bouts of seclusion before you pass away. That would be a waste of your life, and I don't want to see that." Even with a vast quantity of pills at one's disposal, it was still not a simple matter to reach the nascent soul stage. There really wasn't a good chance for Mu Paling to reach the nascent soul stage. Upon hearing Han Li's words, Mu Paling faltered slightly before she opened her mouth to say something again. However, Han Li raised her hand to cut her off as he said, "That's enough. I'm not asking you to make a decision immediately. You can mull this over for a few years. I also have to go into seclusion now, and during this time, I'll give you some pills for you to attempt a breakthrough to the late core formation stage. Also, I'll have to trouble you to guide Kinner in her cultivation in my stead." Yes, my lord. Mu Paling was unwilling to settle for this result, but she could only accept this arrangement in a resigned manner at the sight of Han Li's stern expression. Han Li nodded and gave her a few pills, then spoke with Tian Kinner for a while before also sending the two of them on their way. Thus, Han Li was the only one left within the cave abode, and he slowly closed his eyes as he heaved a long sigh. It seemed that there was more turmoil in his heart than he had let on. He sat in silence for a full 15 minutes, and when he opened his eyes again, an expression of tranquility had reappeared on his face. It appeared that he had been able to settle his internal conflict. He suddenly patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and a flash of silver light immediately appeared before him. The humanoid puppet emerged and stood in front of him in a completely stationary manner. Han Li examined the humanoid puppet for a while, and a layer of silver light suddenly surfaced over the humanoid puppet's face at his behest. Its middle-aged features blurred, and when they regained clarity again, those facial features had become completely identical to Han Li's, making it appear as if the puppet were none other than Han Li himself. Almost at the exact same moment, the humanoid puppet's body tremored, and it suddenly grew a few inches, making it identical to Han Li in height as well. Han Li examined the puppet again before nodding with a content expression and waving a hand toward it. The humanoid puppet's expressionless figure swayed, and it immediately disappeared amid a flash of silver light. Han Li lowered his head in contemplation for a while before exiting the hall of the cave abode, heading directly for the secret chamber. Along the way, he suddenly said without any premonition, "My second nascent soul hasn't been causing any trouble for you in the cauldron, has it, fellow Taoist?" The voice of a small child replied from within the heaven-void cauldron in Han Li's sleeve. He, it's just a mid-nascent soul without a body. How will it pose any trouble to me? It's just that with this guy in here, the cauldron is feeling a little cramped. Please bear with it for a while longer, fellow Taoist Endless Sky. I'll assimilate this second nascent soul right away, then withdraw it from the cauldron so you won't be troubled by its presence any longer. After that, I'll assist you during your metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation so you can manifest a human form. Do you have any objections to this arrangement, fellow Taoist? Of course not. I'm glad that you still remember this, fellow Taoist Han. The Endless Sky Beast was elated upon hearing Han Li's words. Han Li smiled and didn't converse with the Endless Sky Beast any further as he made his way into the secret chamber in a flash. The stone door behind him closed soundlessly. Han Li slowly made his way over to the center of the secret chamber before waving his sleeve through the air. A burst of azure light shot forth before spinning in the air, then transforming into a small azure cauldron that hovered before him. Azure light flashed over the surface of the cauldron as the indistinct figure of a small child appeared. The small child was sitting on the lid of the cauldron with his legs crossed, wearing an expectant smile on his face, as if he were preparing to watch an enthralling show. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, and he completely disregarded the small child as he patted his storage pouch to summon a stack of formation flags. He raised a hand, and a dozen or so formation flags flew toward all directions within the secret chamber in a flash. A faint yellow light barrier then appeared, enshrouding the entire secret chamber within. Han Li made a hand seal expressionlessly before pointing a finger gently at the heaven-void cauldron. The cauldron lid immediately flew into the air at his behest. However, the small child had reacted in advance, flying off to the side while continuing to appraise the small cauldron with a smile on his face. A burst of rumbling erupted from within the cauldron, but nothing else happened aside from that. Han Li's expression darkened as he chanted something and cast an incantation seal onto the cauldron. The heaven-void cauldron immediately tremored slightly as something emerged from within. It was an azure cocoon around half a foot in length, constructed from countless azure threads. "Break!" Han Li let loose a low cry. A peculiar scene unfolded. All of the azure threads that the cocoon was comprised of snapped, before dissipating into the specks of light in the blink of an eye. The second nascent soul was immediately revealed. It current had its eyes tightly shut and was hovering in the air in a completely still manner, seemingly yet to regain consciousness. Han Li's eyes narrowed upon seeing this, and he immediately feigned a grabbing motion without any hesitation. Several shiny silver needles abruptly appeared between his fingertips, and he aimed a cold glance at the nascent soul in the air before sweeping his hand through the air. Black light suddenly flashed around the seemingly unconscious nascent soul, upon which it disappeared into thin air. The silver needles naturally struck empty space as a result. Han Li was not startled by this turn of events. Instead, a cold smile appeared on his face as he pointed toward the heaven-void cauldron, upon which a clump of azure threads suddenly shot forth from a corner of the secret chamber. Brilliant azure light erupted, enshrouding a certain patch of space. A muffled groan rang out as the second nascent soul appeared once again within the flashing azure threads. At this point, its neck and limbs had already been tightly bound by the azure threads, rendering it completely immobile. At this moment, the dozen or so silver needles that had missed their target earlier flashed through the air again. The silver needles shot forth at a rapid speed, embedding themselves into various parts of the nascent soul's body in the blink of an eye. The nascent soul's body tremored, and it immediately lost its ability to summon any magic power. A look of despair appeared on its little face. You won't be getting away. All of your thought processes are replicas of mine, so how are you going to fool me with your tricks? I don't plan to destroy you. I merely intend to assimilate you again, so why do you continue to resist? Han Li asked in a gentle voice, as if he were conversing with a close friend. The second nascent soul knew that there was no way for it to escape, so it relinquished any efforts to resist as it roared in a resentful manner. You won't destroy me. After losing my sentient will I still be me? What's the difference? That's true. However, you're supposed to be my second nascent soul, so you shouldn't have sentient will of your own to begin with. You have nothing to complain about as I'm merely taking away a privilege from you, not a right. You can only blame yourself for manifesting something that shouldn't exist. Han Li gave a cold reply, and he didn't want to waste any more time with words. As such, he made a hand seal, and brilliant azure light erupted from the threads that were binding the second nascent soul. The second nascent soul felt its vision go dark before it fell truly unconscious. Only then did Han Li's expression ease slightly. However, a thought then suddenly occurred to him as he turned his gaze toward the small child beside him. In response to Han Li's cold glare, the small child obediently dissipated into nothingness without a word. Han Li nodded to himself upon seeing this, before pointing a finger at the cauldron hovering in the air. Azure light flashed over the surface of the cauldron before the lid was replaced. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li opened his mouth to blast forth a burst of azure light, which swept the small cauldron up within. The cauldron then rapidly shrank within the azure light, flashing a few times before being swallowed by Han Li. Han Li heaved a faint sigh before sitting down with his legs crossed. At the same time, he feigned a grabbing motion toward the second nascent soul in what seemed to a casual manner. The nascent soul was immediately drawn to him by an immense suction force, and it was forced to hover around 10 feet in front of Han Li. Han Li used his spiritual sense to carefully examine the nascent soul's condition, and after verifying that its spiritual sense was indeed far inferior to his, he closed his eyes in a content manner before patting the top of his own head. Azure light immediately flashed over the top of his head as an azure nascent soul that was only a few inches in size silently emerged. The nascent soul was standing on a small azure cauldron and carrying a green wooden ruler in both hands. There was a white bead circling above its head, and a ball of indistinct black chi on its glabella, as well as several tens of miniature golden swords flying around its body. This was none other than the main nascent soul that Han Li had been arduously cultivating for over a century. The nascent soul wore a completely neutral expression as it glanced toward the second nascent soul in a calm manner. Azure light flashed from the small cauldron beneath its feet, carrying it directly over to the second nascent soul. When it was only about a foot away from the second nascent soul, Han Li's nascent soul suddenly halted in its flight. It glanced at the azure threads around its counterpart's body, and suddenly stamped its little foot gently onto the small cauldron. The small cauldron emitted a ringing sound, and the azure threads around the second nascent soul's body disappeared in a flash, leaving only the nascent soul itself hovering in midair. The heaven-void cauldron beneath Han Li's nascent soul suddenly began to slowly expand. The nascent soul sat atop the cauldron with its little legs crossed in a calm and collected manner. It then tossed its green ruler into the air, then made a hand seal and chanted something in an unintelligibly quiet voice. Brilliant azure light erupted from the body of Han Li's nascent soul, and it slowly closed its eyes. However, the ball of black chi on its glabella suddenly materialized to form a third inky black eye. The eye was shimmering with an unsettling light, and it stared intently at the second nascent soul with an unblinking gaze. Right at this moment, Han Li's nascent soul suddenly stopped its chanting as a burst of black light suddenly shot forth from its third eye, directly striking the second nascent soul's body. The second nascent soul shuddered as it opened its eyes, but its pupils were completely blank, as if it were delirious. Right at this moment, Han Li's nascent soul also opened its eyes. Two pillars of azure light erupted from its pupils, shooting directly into the eyes of the second nascent soul, as if it were forcibly injecting something into the second nascent soul's body. The second nascent soul's limbs hung limply by his sides, yet its body was trembling uncontrollably. At the same time, an expression of excruciating pain suddenly appeared on its blank face, as if it wanted to cry out but was unable to do so. Han Li's nascent soul remained completely expressionless throughout this entire process. It merely continued to blast the azure pillars of light out of its eyes, and completely ignored the second nascent soul's suffering. Half a month later, the stone door of the secret chamber opened by itself, and Han Li emerged from within with a tranquil expression. Silver light flashed outside the door, and the humanoid puppet, which was now completely identical to Han Li, appeared before him. Han Li glanced at the puppet, and a smile appeared on his face. He stroked his own forehead, upon which the second nascent soul immediately appeared. The nascent soul wore a completely blank expression as its body swayed before flying through the air as a streak of black light, disappearing into the humanoid puppet's body. Moments later, the puppet suddenly blinked its dead eyes, and it was suddenly filled with vitality, as if it were an actual living person. Han Li rubbed his hands together with a smile upon seeing this. Not bad. This is exactly how I envisioned this go, using the secret technique on the Great Development Treasure Scriptures to inject the second nascent soul into the humanoid puppet's body allows it to control the puppet. From now on, I won't have to worry about being unable to control the puppet due to distance constraints. As long as I don't go on excessively lengthy journeys in the future, the humanoid puppet can remain in this cave abode along with the second nascent soul. This is indeed a very creative masterstroke, fellow Taoist Han, but aren't you worried that mishaps could occur if the second nascent soul develops sentient will again? In that case, it would possess a late nascent soul stage vessel in the form of this humanoid puppet. It'll be extremely difficult for you to recover the second nascent soul again after that. The unimpressed voice of a small child suddenly sounded from within Han Li's sleeve. I'm well aware of that potential risk, fellow Taoist, which is why on this occasion, I'll be using a few restriction secret techniques that I recently mastered as a late nascent soul cultivator on the second nascent soul, and I'll also be tinkering with the humanoid puppet a bit as well. Unless the second nascent soul's spiritual sense really becomes more powerful than that of my main nascent soul, I'll be able to completely immobilize at any time I want, Han Li replied confidently. Looks like you've planned things out well in advance, fellow Taoist Han. It appears that my concerns were unwarranted, the small child chuckled. Regardless, I must still thank you for your kind intentions. Now then, would you like to transcend your lightning tribulation here on the interconnected peaks or go somewhere else during this process? Han Li asked. The small child hesitated momentarily before suggesting in a euphemistic manner, these interconnected peaks most likely won't be a good place for tribulation transcendence. After all, even the restriction here won't be able to conceal the metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation. I have full trust in your abilities, but I think it's best to find a more secluded place. All right, I'll go and see Wanner first, then take you somewhere else. Han Li had no intention of arguing with the endless sky beast on this manner. He then exited the cave abode and traveled to the drifting cloud sect to visit Nangong Wan in order to check on her cultivation progress. A day later, Han Li left the drifting cloud sect again and flew toward the west as a streak of azure light. 5 days later, Han Li appeared above an extremely barren and desolate set of plains. There was not a single blade of grass growing on this land, and there were only yellow soil as well as grayish-white rocks of different sizes stretching as far as the eye could see in all directions. Han Li unleashed his spiritual sense to survey the area in a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers, upon which he discovered that there wasn't so much as a single cultivator or mortal around. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, and a small cauldron enshrouded in a ball of azure light shot forth from within. He then said, "How about this place? This is a vast expanse of dead land on the border between our state of Zai and the state of Huyu. There's no one around for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, so it'll be a lot safer for you to transcend your metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation here." The small child inside the cauldron gave an elated reply. "This is indeed a good place for tribulation transcendence. Please release my true body from the cauldron and let me meditate for 3 days. After that, I'll be ready for the tribulation transcendence." "No problem." Han Li nodded before flicking a finger toward the small cauldron in the air. A light thud rang out as the cauldron lid flew into the air of its own accord. The small cauldron then tipped itself over, and a burst of azure light swept forth, revealing a demon beast that was about half a foot in size with the head of a cow and the body of a worm. Upon emerging from the azure light, the demon beast's body instantly swelled drastically to several tens of feet in size, and its entire body was shimmering with azure light. "I'll have to trouble you to protect me for a while here, fellow Taoist," the demon beast said in the voice of a small child. Its worm body then coiled up, and it descended onto a large white rock down below, where it sat in a completely stationary manner. Han Li didn't say anything as he looked on from above. However, his body then swayed, and he also descended onto a nearby rock, where he sat with his eyes closed and his legs crossed. Thus, the two of them sat for 3 days and 3 nights. Just as the sun began to rise on the 4th day, both of them opened their eyes in unison. "The magic power within my body is now in its most optimal state, so I have at least a 60% to 70% chance of being able to successfully transcend this lightning tribulation. You don't have to help me in the initial phase. If I encounter any difficulty, it should be in the later phases. If you can defend me from the final 3 waves of lightning strikes, I'd be extremely grateful to you," the endless sky beast said with a serious expression. "I see. I'll do as you say. I suggest you take a drop of this before you transcend your tribulation." Han Li suddenly flipped his hand over to summon a small, profound ice vial that was emanating bursts of glacial qi, and he tossed the vial to the demon beast before him. "What's this?" The demon beast caught the vial with a slightly bewildered expression, then opened the lid on the vial and assessed its contents with its spiritual sense. "Glacial quintessence. I didn't think you would have something like this, fellow Taoist," the endless sky beast exclaimed with shock and elation. "I happened to obtain some during my time in the Great Jin. Seeing as you taught me the beveled silver text, I can offer a drop of this glacial quintessence to you. I hope that's enough for you," Han Li said as he stroked his chin. "Haha, it's definitely enough. Glacial quintessence is something that's extremely rare, even in the spirit realm. Some would occasionally be discovered, but they would quickly be taken by my demon race brethren." The endless sky beast was very excited as he turned to Han Li and said, "Just a single drop of this is enough for me. I'll remember this and be sure to repay you handsomely for this in the future." The demon beast's final sentence was very earnest. Han Li smiled upon hearing this, but didn't reply. Instead, he patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and a stack of formation flags and formation plates abruptly appeared in his hand. He then began setting up a relatively complex restriction formation in the surrounding area. Around 10 minutes, Han Li's body swayed, and he returned to his original spot. Layers of white mist had appeared nearby, concealing the entire area. Han Li turned to the demon beast and said, "This formation should be able to prevent any unforeseen mishaps from taking place. I'll be assisting you from outside the formation, and I'll leave the initial waves of lightning tribulation to you, fellow Taoist." Of course, Metamorphosis stage tribulation lightning is true heavenly lightning, so there's no way that a normal restriction in the human world would be able to keep it at bay. By the way, my lightning tribulation can perhaps benefit you as well. A thought seemed to have suddenly occurred to the demon beast, and a peculiar light flashed through its eyes. "Your lightning tribulation can benefit me." Han Li was quite surprised to hear this. Indeed, this is a little-known fact in the human world, but something that is common knowledge in the spirit realm. The endless sky beast chuckled before its lips tremored, and it began to transmit its voice to Han Li. Han Li listened within a hint of bewilderment on his face, which was gradually replaced by excitement. If that really is true, then this is indeed a rare opportunity. I just so happen to be carrying a treasure that fits this description, so I can give it a try, Han Li said with a nod. "Haha, I wouldn't lie to you about something like this, fellow Taoist. However, make sure you strike only when the moment is right. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, it could harm you rather than benefit you," the demon beast cautioned. "Rest assured, fellow Taoist, I won't act recklessly," Han Li replied with a smile. "I can see that you're not a rash individual, fellow Taoist Han. Now then, I'm going to draw the heavenly lightning to me and prepare to transcend my tribulation. If it weren't for the fact that I'm proficient in some concealment secret techniques, the lightning tribulation would have descended from the moment that I emerged from the cauldron." The endless sky beast heaved a faint sigh before slowly hovering up into the air. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, and he immediately flew out of the formation he had just set up as a streak of azure light. Blue light then flashed within his eyes as he stared intently at the demon beast through the layers of dense white mist. After rising to an altitude of over 300 feet, the demon beast stopped and looked up into the sky. All of a sudden, a dull sound rang out from its nostrils, and azure light began to flash violently all over its body. At the same time, gusts of gray demonic winds were swept up around it, concealing its body within. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. An earth-shattering roar then erupted from within the gusts of demonic wings, and a burst of powerful demonic chi erupted into the heavens. The endless sky beast seemed to have unleashed some type of secret technique that had made its body swell drastically to several times its original size. It was putting its demonic chi as an 8th-grade demon beast on full display. Within the span of a breath, a clap of thunder suddenly exploded in the cloudless sky. Immediately thereafter, gale-force winds were swept up in a radius of thousands of kilometers as dark clouds appeared from thin air, giving the sky an extremely dark and sinister appearance. At the same time, rain began to pelt down amid the rumbling thunderclaps. Han Li couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder upon seeing this. As far as he was aware, this barren land was known as the Dead Land as it had always been an extremely dry place. It was often the case that this land would experience no rainfall for stretches of several decades. However, as soon as the endless sky beast had unleashed its demonic chi, the climate here had been completely transformed. It appeared that its metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation really wasn't something to be scoffed at. The dark clouds in the air before tumble and surged drastically as arcs of lightning as thick as human arms surfaced within the dark clouds. Each and every flash of lightning was followed by an astonishing clap of thunder. A series of massive lightning nets gradually took shape. Han Li pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes as he looked on from below. Right at this moment, the demon beast within the formation let loose an almighty roar. As a result, the gray demonic winds became several times more powerful, transforming into a grayish-white hurricane that rose straight up into the sky, as if it were threatening to plunge into the dark clouds and eradicate the lightning within. A thunderous boom erupted as an arc of lightning descended from the dark cloud like a gargantuan sword, directly striking the apex of the demonic hurricane. Silver light flashed, and the grayish-white hurricane tremored violently before it was sliced apart down the middle. The lightning and the hurricane disappeared in unison, and the demon beast's figure was revealed again. At this moment, it had coiled its body up into a ball, and its appearance was also slightly different from before as it had grown a pair of purple fleshy wings and muscular green arms on the sides of the body. Han Li stared at it for a long while, but was still unable to draw any connection with this beast and any of the legendary heavenly spirit beasts. The endless sky beast looked up at the thick bolts of lightning in the sky as it gently flapped its new purple wings. With each and every flap of its wings, a ball of demonic chi would appear around it, and its body was completely enshrouded within gray chi in the blink of an eye. The bolts of lightning in the sky seemed to have finally reached a point where there was no going back, and arcs of lightning that were each over a foot in size descended from above amid deafening thunderclaps. The lightning fell in dense waves, enshrouding the entire area in a radius of over 5 kilometers. Even the spectating Han Li wasn't exempt from the scope of the lightning strikes. Han Li exhaled lightly as he made a hand seal. A dull thunderclap erupted as a golden net of lightning appeared. The net then expanded drastically, transforming into a massive golden net that shielded Han Li's entire body beneath it. An arc of lightning struck the golden necks from above, upon which golden and silver light flashed before instantly vanishing. In the aftermath of that lightning strike, the golden net tremored gently, but remained completely unscathed. Han Li paid no heed to this, as he continued to look up at the ball of grayish-white demonic chi through narrowed eyes. Even though he had been swept up in the scope of the lightning strike, the majority of the lightning arcs were still crashing down toward the Han Li. The demon beast was at the very center of the blast area, and the bolts of lightning striking down upon it was many times that of the lightning that Han Li had to deal with. With Han Li's spirit eyes, he was able to see that the cloud of grayish-white chi had been completely inundated by silver light. The arcs of lightning were falling like rain, and there was simply no way to evade them. Han Li's face remained expressionless, but he was quite surprised internally. He had witnessed a metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation once before in the scattered star seas, which was when that demonic tortoise that he had slain was transcending its tribulation. However, the commotion from that tribulation couldn't even compare to this one, and at the time, The demonic tortoise had already reached the final stages of its tribulation transcendence, whereas the endless sky beast was only just getting started. It was difficult to imagine just how insane this tribulation would become in its final stages. Could it be that different demon beasts were afflicted by completely different levels of lightning tribulations? Han Li thought about the subject. He realized that there really weren't many books or tomes in the human world that described demon beast tribulations. On the rare instances that this topic was mentioned, the descriptions were always very brief and revealed very little information. Metamorphosis stage lightning tribulations were exclusive to demon beasts and had nothing to do with human cultivators, so it was no surprise that there were barely any records on the subject. Even if there were human cultivators who were curious about this topic, it was an extremely rare opportunity to be able to witness the tribulation transcendence of a high-grade demon beast. After all, demon beasts were in their most feeble state right after their tribulation transcendence, so there was no way that they would allow a human cultivator to spectate from nearby. Even though Han Li was rather perplexed, but he didn't think much of this matter. After all, at his current power level, this lightning tribulation wasn't a big deal to him. Following a sustained assault from the arcs of lightning for a short period of time, the thunderclaps in the sky temporarily subsided. Han Li looked on from below to find that the grayish-white demonic chi within the formation was already in tatters, and only an extremely thin layer of it remained. The endless sky beast took advantage of this temporary respite to make a series of hand seals as its fleshy wings flapped rapidly. At the same time, it opened its massive mouth and also blasted forth bursts of gray demonic chi. Thus, a ball of demonic chi that was several times denser than the one before took shape in the blink of an eye, encapsulating the demon beast within again. The endless sky beast's expression remained quite calm, and it wasn't flustered in the slightest, appearing as if it had already anticipated the ferocity of this lightning tribulation. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. It appeared that the demon beast would be able to withstand the earlier stages of the lightning tribulation, so he wouldn't have to step in anytime soon. However, the opportunity that it had disclosed to him earlier was quite important, so he had to focus and make sure he didn't miss out on it. With that in mind, Han Li patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and several treasures of different colors immediately shot forth, landing on the ground before Han Li in a single horizontal line. The treasures consisted of a yellow gourd, a pristine white bow, and an azure jade vial, all of which were container treasures. At this moment, loud thunderclaps erupted in the air again, as the second wave of lightning came crashing down from above. On this occasion, the wave of lightning was clearly far denser than the last wave, and the individual arcs of lightning were also a lot larger, thereby creating an even more formidable sight to behold. After summoning those container treasures from his storage pouch, Han Li no longer paid any heed to the endless sky beast. Instead, he sat down with his legs folded and his eyes closed, seemingly priming himself for an important upcoming task. 2 hours passed, and the endless sky beast endured 6 successive waves of lightning strikes, each of which was more fearsome than the previous wave. When the third wave arrived, the arcs of lightning had grown to 5 feet in size and were cascading down like a silver river of light. Even the restriction that Han Li had set up earlier had been damaged in many places by that wave of lightning. In contrast, the net materialized from Han Li's divine Devilbane lightning remained completely unscathed and shielded him securely within. Meanwhile, the endless sky beast was unable to withstand the assault commencing from the fourth wave of lightning strikes, and it was forced to unleash another technique to further expand its body, taking it to over 100 feet in size. The demonic chi erupting from its mouth had also changed from its original grayish-white color into a silvery white hue that was similar to the color of the lightning. What was peculiar about this demonic chi was that, as it came into contact with the lightning crashing down from above, the sound of clashing metal rang out. Most of the arcs of lightning were repelled as a result of the clashes, so the demonic chi only had to withstand less than half of the lightning being directed toward it. Han Li was originally sitting down on the ground below with his eyes closed, yet even he couldn't help but open his eyes and look on in surprise. Only then did he discover that this silvery white demonic chi was shimmering with a piercing light and was giving off an extremely frosty appearance. That seems to have something to do with the glacial quintessence I gave it. Could it be that it's already refined the glacial quintessence in such a short time? Han Li thought to himself. After expelling this peculiar demonic chi, the pressure on the endless sky beast was eased significantly, and it was able to withstand another wave of lightning strikes. However, as soon as the seventh wave of lightning strikes commenced, the demon beast's expression became extremely grave and tense. The dark clouds in the sky also began to surge and roared violently, and all of the massive nets of lightning in the sky began to plummet in unison. All of a sudden, the entire sky was illuminated by silver light, and the deafening thunderclaps drowned out all sounds in the surrounding area. It was as if there was nothing else in this world aside from the dazzling arcs of silver lightning. Right at this moment, the endless sky beast transmitted his voice to Han Li. "Fellow Taoist Han, the lightning tribulation in the human world seems to be more powerful than I expected. I'm only going to be able to withstand 2 more waves of lightning strikes on my own, so I'll need your help to transcend the final 3 waves. Don't worry, fellow Taoist Endless Sky. I'll lend you my assistance when the time comes." "Thank you, fellow Taoist Han. I won't forget what you've done for me." The Endless Sky Beast was very relieved to hear Han Li's promise. After all, with a great cultivator assisting it, it should be able to transcend this lightning tribulation no matter how powerful it was. The silver nets of lightning enshrouded the demon beast down below one after the other, and countless arcs of lightning erupted from the nets in unison, striking at the silver demonic chi with all their might. Even though most of the lightning had been repelled by the demonic chi, the remaining arcs that snuck through were still an astonishing number of lightning arcs that managed to sneak through. The silver demonic chi was being whittled down by the arcs of lightning at a rate that was perceptible to the naked eye, and following the 7th wave of lightning strikes, half of it had been eradicated. However, there seemed to be no end to this demonic chi, as the Endless Sky Beast merely blasted more silvery white demonic chi out of its mouth, following the conclusion of the 7th wave. At this moment, the 8th wave of lightning strikes arrived. Nets of lightning that were twice the size of the ones in the 7th wave began to descend with devastating force. Earth-shattering booms erupted, and the surface of the demonic chi was immediately tinged golden as the surrounding earth began to tremor. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D55E. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of such fearsome lightning, but his expression quickly reverted back normal. However, he slowly stood up and began to survey the sky as if he were looking for something. All of a sudden, Han Li's expression changed as he abruptly lowered his head. He cast his gaze toward a certain spot in the distance, and a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. "That's interesting. I didn't think such a creature existed in the heavenly south region," Han Li murmured to himself before abruptly flicking his 10 fingers toward the ground in quick succession. 10 thin red threads shot forth before disappearing into the ground in a flash. Han Li looked down at the ground below him, and a cold smile appeared on his face. All of a sudden, the earth tremored violently, and a blood-curdling howl erupted as large clumps of soil exploded into the sky. Within the yellow soil and sand, a gargantuan creature emerged from the ground. The upper half of its massive body had been bound by a thin thread that was emanating crimson flames. The thread had wound itself around its body 7 or 8 times, charring its skin and making it howl with agony. Han Li was able to take this opportunity to catch a clear glimpse of this creature's appearance. It was a huge yellow creature that appeared to be a gargantuan worm, yet there were countless fleshy feelers of different sizes growing all over the upper half of its body, all of which were thrashing about violently. However, its most eye-catching feature was the massive golden horn on its head, which was shimmering with a dazzling light. What was even more astonishing was that, when the nets of lightning in the sky descended and landed near this creature, the horn on its head would flash erratically, and all of the lightning would be sucked toward the horn before disappearing into it. "It's a narwhal worm, but how could it be so big? And if I recall correctly, the horns of these demon beasts should be white in color." A perplexed look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he looked at the enraged colossus before him. The massive narwhal worm let loose a howl of agony, and a gruesome cavernous mouth suddenly split open on its smooth head. The mouth was filled with sharp, vicious fangs, and silver light flashed, upon which a remarkably thick arc of lightning shot forth from within. The heavenly lightning that had been absorbed by the golden horn like a lightning rod was now being expelled by the demon beast as an attack, and the attack was aimed at none other than Han Li. It's even attained intelligence. Tusk looks like this is some kind of mutant spirit beast. As opposed to being alarmed, Han Li was overjoyed to see this. He rubbed his hands together before raising them at once, and 2 arcs of lightning as thick as his arm shot forth, crashing into the thick arcs of silver lightning in the blink of an eye. Following a thunderous boom, the golden and silver lightning intertwined with one another like giant pythons. Thin arcs of electricity flew in all directions and balls of lightning exploded between Han Li and the massive worm, following which all of the lightning completely nullified each other and ceased to exist. The massive worm seemed to have become even more enraged upon seeing this. Scintillating light radiated from the golden horn on its head, drawing a vast expanse of the heavenly lightning nearby toward it. The lightning was then absorbed into its horn in a frenzy, as if it were accumulating power in preparation for its next attack. However, Han Li suddenly chuckled coldly before opening his mouth. A small golden sword flew out from within before elongating into a streak of light roughly 10 feet in length, following which it continued to hurtle directly toward the massive worm's head. The worm seemed to be able to identify this as an extremely powerful attack, and brilliant yellow light emanated from its body as it attempted to squirm back underground. However, the fire spirit thread that had bound its body suddenly flashed with red light and abruptly thickened to form a length of crimson rope. The rope was as thick as a small tree trunk, and waves of fire surged from the rope, engulfing most of the upper half of the worm's body in the blink of an eye. The massive worm was plunged into a state of shock and horror as its golden horn suddenly stopped absorbing lightning, blasting out a vast expanse of golden light toward the waves of fire engulfing its body instead. As the golden light flashed past, large swathes of flames were swept up and also absorbed into the golden horn. Not only could this giant narwhal worm absorb heavenly lightning, it could even do the same to flames. However, when most of the flames had been absorbed by the giant worm, the golden streak of light that Han Li had unleashed earlier was already upon it. The golden light transformed into a massive sword before crashing down with ferocious might. The huge worm whipped its head, and its golden horn expanded to more than twice its original size as it met the giant sword. A loud clang rang out as the sword and the horn came into the contact with one another. Piercing golden light radiated forth, and the giant sword was repelled by the golden horn, while the latter remained completely unscathed. However, right at this moment, an azure arc of lightning flashed above the massive worm's head, and Han Li emerged out of thin air with the thunderstorm wings on his back. He swept a hand through the air, and another burst of golden sword chi shot forth at an incredible speed, puncturing a large hole with the diameter of a bowl into the beast's body before it could even react. Green blood began to gush out of the wound, but the worm was simply too massive. A wound that would have proven to be lethal had it been inflicted on a normal cultivator was completely inconsequential to this demon beast, and the pain only made it even more enraged. The worm let loose an almighty roar as the feelers on the upper half of its body squirmed before transforming into countless long whips, which swept directly toward Han Li up above. Han Li's expression darkened as he immediately made a hand seal. A dozen or so small golden swords immediately surfaced over various parts of his body before circling through the air, creating a sword barrier that shielded Han Li securely within. As soon as the feelers came into contact with this sword barrier, they were shredded into mangled flesh intermingled with green blood, and none of them were able to even get close to Han Li. At this moment, Han Li began to chant something and pointed a finger downward. The dozen or so small golden swords down below shuddered, and each and every one of them manifested 6 identical streaks of golden light. The several tens of resulting streaks of light then swept downward in unison at Han Li's behest. The worm was stunned upon seeing this, and it immediately opened its cavernous mouth to blast out silver arcs of lightning and balls of crimson flames in a frenzy, desperately trying to keep the golden streaks of light at bay. Loud thumps rang out in quick succession, and a small proportion of the golden streaks of light were eradicated by the lightning arcs and fireballs. However, the rest managed to puncture through the obstructions and reach the worm in a flash. Before the massive worm could do anything, a loud ringing sound erupted as the streaks of golden light converged, and a golden sword that was over 100 feet in length took shape in the blink of an eye. Golden light then flashed, and the giant sword flew like lightning in a circle around the worm's waist. An earth-shattering howl of anguish erupted from the worm's mouth, as an immense quantity of green blood came crashing down like a waterfall. The worm's massive body had been sliced cleanly in half. Just as Han Li was about to withdraw his attacks, an incredible turn of events unfolded. Right after the massive worm was sliced in half, the upper half of its body suddenly flung itself into the air, opening its cavernous mouth as it flew toward Han Li. At the same time, Yellow light flashed from the lower half of the worm's body, and countless feelers grew from the surface of its skin, instantly making it completely identical in appearance to the upper half of its body. A loud boom then rang out as the lower half of the worm's body plunged headfirst into the soil and disappeared. Hanli faltered initially upon seeing this, but he quickly raised his eyebrows as he made a hand seal. At the same time, he quickly uttered the word explode. Letter 1d4 BB, letter 1d4 5F, letter 2 1 2F, letter 2 1 2F, letter 1d4 6 4, letter 1d4 5 2, letter 1d4 4F, letter 1d4 B8, letter 1d4 5C, letter 1d6 2E. Red light immediately flashed from the thick fiery rope, binding the worm's body before it self-detonated. Following a burst of rumbling, a gigantic mushroom cloud appeared, completely engulfing the upper half of the worm's body, and a burst of blood-curdling screeching escaped its massive mouth. The golden horn on its head simply wasn't able to absorb such ferocious flames in a short period of time. At the same time, the massive sword down below circled through the air, slashing past the mushroom cloud like lightning. The screeching within the mushroom cloud immediately came to a halt as green blood fell from the sky like rain. Two massive charred chunks of flesh emanating a foul acrid odor also came plummeting from the sky before crashing heavily onto the ground. Only then did Hanli sweep his spiritual sense toward the ground in an unhurried manner. Upon doing so, he discovered that the other half of the worm wasn't traveling very quickly, having only burrowed itself several kilometers into the ground. As for whether this was the worm's normal speed, or if its speed had been drastically hampered due to its injuries, Hanli didn't know. However, there wasn't really any point in pondering this matter. Seeing as it hadn't managed to get very far away, it would be quite convenient for Hanli to hunt it down. Thus, he patted the spirit beast pouch hanging from his waist, and countless bursts of golden light shot forth from within. Amid a loud and insistent buzzing sound, a cloud of golden beetles appeared above his head. Hanli pointed toward the ground expressionlessly. The cloud of beetles immediately flew downward, and just when they were about to make contact with the ground, they split up into countless spots of golden light amid a dull thump, and those spots of golden light all disappeared into the soil down below. Hanli turned his attention away from the ground and pointed to the mushroom cloud nearby. The massive mushroom cloud abruptly began to shrink at a rapid rate, reverting back into a thick fiery rope in the end. However, it was apparent that the fire shimmering along the rope had dimmed compared to its former brightness. Hanli waved a hand toward the length of rope, and fiery light flashed as it split up into 10 thin fiery threads, each of which was around 20 feet in length, and they gently hovered in the air. Hanli opened his mouth to expel a burst of azure light, which swept the 10 fire spirit threads within. He then gently inhaled, and the fire spirit threads were drawn into his mouth along with the azure light. Only then did Hanli look down at the charred body on the ground below with furrowed brows, and he waved a hand through the air. A streak of golden light flew out from the charred carcass down below, whizzing directly toward Hanli. However, the streak of golden light suddenly came to an abrupt halt when it was only about 10 feet away from Hanli. This was none other than the strange golden horn on the worm's head. The horn didn't appear to be very large when compared to the size of the massive worm's body, but it was actually around 5 to 6 feet in length. The horn was shimmering with golden light, and there were some mysterious runes that were indistinctly visible on its surface. Hanli examined the horn through narrowed eyes. Even though he was very curious about this object, he knew that this wasn't the time to be conducting a close and thorough examination. As such, he thought about it briefly before casting a few incantation seals onto the object. Spiritual light flashed over the surface of the golden horn, and it shrank down to roughly half a foot in length in the blink of an eye. Hanli then plastered a restriction talisman to the golden horn and placed it into a wooden box, which he stowed away into his storage pouch. After doing all that, Hanli clapped his hands together with a pleased look on his face. Just as he was about to turn his attention toward the gold-devouring beetles, a certain patch of earth over 5 kilometers away suddenly began to tremor violently. The half of the massive worm that had escaped shot forth from the ground, but there were countless spots of golden light all over its body. There were thousands of gold-devouring beetles crawling all over its skin, and they were rapidly devouring the worm's body. The half of the worm cried out in agony as its massive body crashed heavily onto the ground, where it rolled and writhed violently, desperately trying to remove the beetles from its body. However, the golden beetles seemed to have taken root on the surface of its body and were proving to be irremovable. They began to tear open the hard skin on the surface of the worm before quickly squirming into its body. As a result, the massive worm was struck by inexplicably excruciating pain, aching to have thousands of tiny blades slicing through its body. It was driven insane by its agony, squirming into the ground before flying into the air over and over again. However, no matter how much it struggled, it was unable to shake off the golden beetles. A short while later, just as it had flown into the air and was convulsing spasmodically, its body suddenly completely stiffened before crashing onto the ground, where it lay, completely stationary. Hanli heaved a faint sigh upon seeing this before directing his gaze toward the endless sky beast. Arcs of heavenly lightning were still falling incessantly for the sky above, and Hanli's thunderstorm wings were also flashing relentlessly with arcs of azure lightning. Any lightning nets that drew close would be swatted aside by the thunderstorm wings, so none of them could come into contact with Hanli's body. Compared to the beginning of the 8th wave of lightning strikes, there were significantly fewer lightning nets in the sky. The endless sky beast had finally withstood the 8th wave on its own, and it seemed to be time for Hanli to step in. However, prior to doing so, Hanli hurriedly raised his head as blue light flashed within his eyes. He was staring up into the sky with an intense, unblinking gaze, as if he were searching for something. When the lightning strikes completely ceased, a peculiar fragrant scent came wafting from within the dark clouds. Immediately thereafter, the dark clouds tumbled and surged, and a massive full moon with the appearance of a jade plate suddenly appeared. The full moon was extremely pristine and was emanating a faint white light. That fragrant scent also seemed to be emitting from none other than that moon. Hanli took a deep breath upon seeing this, and the thunderstorm wings on his back flapped gently as he abruptly disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, he appeared on the border of where the formation once was, then immediately waved a hand toward the 3 container treasures on the ground below. The gourd, jade vial, and round bowl immediately flew into the air, before circling in the air above Hanli's head. Right at this moment, the full moon in the sky tilted slightly, and a burst of peculiar silver light shone down directly upon the endless sky beast from the moon. The fragrant scent in the air became even more pronounced as a layer of rippling watery light suddenly appeared over the surface of the moon. It was as if something were about to drip down from the moon. Hanli's body immediately swayed without hesitation as he rose up into the sky as a streak of azure light with his 3 container treasures in accompaniment. At this moment, a fist-sized ball of white liquid finally came dripping down from the moon. However, as soon as it detached itself from the moon's surface, it transformed into specks of white light, which slowly flowed toward the endless sky beast along the ray of silver light. What was peculiar was that those specks of light could only exist within the ray of silver light. As soon as they left that area and drifted into the outside world, they would instantly cease to exist. The white spots of light immediately disappeared one by one after coming into contact with the demon beast's body. The endless sky beast was in a rather feeble state from withstanding the lightning tribulation, but as soon as it absorbed a few spots of white light, it was immediately completely reinvigorated. A burst of demonic chi was expelled from its mouth, catching all of the specks of white light falling from above before sucking them into its mouth. This process seemed to be providing some form of stimulus for the demon beast as its body was expanding drastically once again. The light over the surface of the moon rippled, and another ball of liquid slowly dripped down before also transforming into countless specks of white light. At this moment, a streak of azure light hurtled toward the full moon within the dark clouds. However, when it was still over 1,000 feet away, the silver light in the surrounding air suddenly flashed, and countless arcs of silver lightning abruptly appeared within the clouds amid a burst of loud rumbling. The silver lightning arcs flashed wildly as they came crashing down toward Hanli in unison. All of a sudden, it was as if countless silver snakes were throwing themselves at Hanli at once, creating quite a formidable sight to behold. Despite all of the tumultuous storms that Hanli had weathered in the past, he was still given a fright by the scenes unfolding before his eyes. Thankfully, the endless sky beast had mentioned such a phenomenon during its voice transmission, so even though he was rather surprised by the ferocity of the attacks being directed at him, he was prepared well in advance. He flipped a hand over and a shimmering green object appeared over his palm. It was none other than his spirit treasure, the 8th spirit ruler. Just as the countless arcs of silver lightning were about to strike him, Hanli waved his wooden ruler through the air. Silver lotus flowers began to appear all around him, each of which was roughly the size of a palm, creating a watertight barrier around him. The silver arcs of lightning struck the lotus flowers amid booming thunderclaps, as countless thin arcs of electricity flashed over the surface of the barrier. The lotus flowers were vanquished in quick succession by the vast number of lightning arcs, but another barrier of silver lotus flowers immediately surged forth in its place. It was as if there was no end to these lotus flowers, and they really were able to keep the fearsome lightning strikes at bay. The azure streak of light flashed through the air, and was only over 100 feet away from the full moon. As the second ball of white liquid dripped down from the moon, Han Li suddenly faltered for an instant, as if he had abruptly found himself in a restricted area, and countless lightning arcs came surging toward him from all directions. This wave of lightning strikes seemed to be even more concentrated than the previous one. However, Han Li's entire body was enshrouded by countless silver lotus flowers, and he paid the lightning arcs no heed as he pointed toward the three container treasures before him. The gourd, the jade vial, and the bowl immediately flew toward the silver moon as three balls of spiritual light. As soon as they shot forth through the air, countless arcs of lightning surrounded Han Li. On this occasion, the lightning strikes were even more ferocious, and as they exploded around him, Han Li was like a small raft caught within a turbulent sea. Despite the seemingly limitless supply of lotus flowers being churned out by the eight-spirit ruler, the barrier surrounding Han Li's body was struggling to keep the fierce barrage at bay. The area that the lotus flowers encapsulated was quickly shrinking, while countless arcs of silver lightning were rapidly converging toward Han Li. However, he paid his perilous situation no heed as he focused his attention entirely on his three container treasures and flew slowly toward the full moon. That's right, he was flying slowly toward the moon. For some reason, as soon as the three container treasures reached a distance within 30 feet away from the moon, all of them became impossibly heavy, as if they had triggered some kind of restriction. As such, they could approach the moon at an agonizing snail's pace. At this point, the full moon had already secreted its second drop of liquid, yet it was slowly becoming blurry and indistinct, as if it were about to disappear at any moment. At the same time, the dark clouds in the sky began to tumble and surge again as a burst of spiritual pressure that was quite astonishing, even to Han Li, was slowly taking shape. This was clearly a precursor for the ninth wave of lightning strikes. The container treasures were still several feet away from the full moon, yet they were still moving as if they were trudging through a swamp, and Han Li knew that he had to do something. He suddenly let loose a loud cry as he gathered his spiritual sense, and abruptly unleashed a spirit-stunned thorn toward the full moon. A burst of enormous power swept toward the full moon, carving a rift into the watery light shimmering over its surface. The three container treasures just so happened to pass through the rift and immediately sped up appreciably. Han Li opened his mouth without any hesitation upon seeing this, expelling a mouthful of blood essence, then flicking his 10 fingers toward the blood essence in quick succession. The blood essence instantly transformed into a cloud of blood mist before disappearing in a flash. A peculiar scene then ensued. The three container treasures were originally of different colors, yet as soon as the blood mist disappeared, all three began to emit a crimson glow. They tremored and broke through the restriction in unison, disappearing into the full moon in a flash. Almost at the exact same moment, the indistinct moon completely vanished, leaving only the three container treasures hovering in midair. Even Han Li wasn't sure whether the treasures had managed to store something from the moon or were still empty. A booming thunderclap erupted, and all of the lightning arcs that were attacking Han Li in a maddened frenzy disappeared into the dark clouds in a flash. As opposed to becoming more relaxed and relieved upon seeing this, Han Li adopted a grim expression instead. He waved a hand through the air, and the three container treasures immediately flew back toward him. Azure light radiated from Han Li's body, and the treasures appeared before him the blink of an eye. His hands shot forth like lightning as he grabbed onto the yellow gourd hovering in the air. He took a glance inside the gourd before flipping his hand over, upon which the gourd abruptly disappeared. As for the other two treasures, he didn't even inspect them before stowing them away into his storage pouch. Throughout this entire process, Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged. However, the faint fragrance emanating from within the container treasures indicated that his efforts had not been in vain. The endless sky beast paid no heed to what Han Li was doing. At this moment, its attention was entirely focused on the lightning tribulation in the air above. The erratic arcs of lightning in the sky had completely disappeared, but the demon beast could sense immensely powerful fluctuations proliferating from the spot in the dark clouds directly above it, and it didn't dare to let its focus waver in the slightest. The silver demonic chi around its body had completely disappeared, leaving it standing at the center of the formation in a completely vulnerable manner. It wasn't even emitting any more of its original grayish-white demonic chi, as it seemed to be certain that none of this would help it in the slightest in the face of the upcoming lightning tribulation. A smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he was just about to say something to the demon beast when an extremely dull thunderclap rang out from above. A gigantic arc of silver lightning as thick as a water tank surfaced beneath the dark clouds. The arc of lightning was over 200 feet in length, and following several flashes of silver light in quick succession, it came crashing down violently toward the endless sky beast like a massive silver worm. The incandescent silver light radiating from the giant worm's body had virtually illuminated the entire sky, and it was descending with truly astonishing might. The endless sky beast's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and it opened its mouth without any hesitation. A gray bead shot forth from within before rotating incessantly above the demon beast's head. That bead was none other than its demon core. However, before the silver worm managed to strike the demon beast, Han Li finally sprang into action. He raised a hand, and a small silver shield flew through the air before transforming into a silver barrier of light that encapsulated the endless sky beast within. Han Li then looked on from down below with a calm smile on his face. The endless sky beast immediately heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing this. The silver worm crashed into the silver light barrier amid a burst of thunderous rumbling as piercing silver light radiated in all directions. However, the silver light barrier beneath it merely tremored erratically before settling again, as if nothing had happened. The silver lightning worm's attack had been thwarted, yet it didn't immediately dissipate. Instead, it began to circle around the light barrier. Rumbling thunderclaps erupted over and over again, yet with each passing strike, the silver worm's body would shrink a little. Following a dozen or so consecutive attacks, the silver worm had been reduced to around half of its original size. "That's enough, fellow Taoist Han. You can withdraw your treasure. I can handle this on my own now," the endless sky beast suddenly yelled. Han Li pointed a finger toward the center of the formation upon hearing this, and the silver light barrier disappeared in a flash. Prior to coming here, the endless sky beast had told Han Li that external assistance could be recruited by a demon beast during their metamorphosis stage lightning tribulation, and they could even request for help in partially nullifying the power of the lightning tribulation. However, they still had to withstand close to half of the power of each wave of lightning tribulation on their own. Otherwise, the waves of lightning strikes would continue to repeat themselves. As such, the endless sky beast was only asking Han Li to nullify most of the power from the final 3 waves of lightning tribulation. As such, Han Li wasn't surprised by the demon beast's request, and immediately withdrew his silver shield. Without the protection of the silver light barrier, the lightning worm immediately pounced toward the endless sky beast, only to be kept at bay again by that grayish-white demon core. The enormous arc of lightning struck the core, causing it to tremor slightly, but it remained firm and resolute, easily withstanding most of the power from the lightning strike. After that, no matter which angle the silver worm attempted to attack the endless sky beast from, the demon core was always one step ahead. Thus, the silver worm continued to be whittled down following a string of loud explosions. Han Li stroked up his chin as he looked on from below. It appeared that it would be no issue for him to buffer the remaining 2 waves of lightning tribulation. After all, this was only the tribulation for an 8th-grade demon beast, and no matter how fearsome it was to the demon beast itself, the tribulation ultimately wasn't all that formidable in his eyes. The key would lie in whether the demon beast would be able to withstand the remaining might of the lightning strikes. The final 2 waves of lightning strikes progressed as Han Li had expected. After nullifying most of their power with his silver shield, the endless sky beast's demon core was able to take care of the rest, albeit with a certain degree of difficulty. Following the conclusion of the final wave of lightning tribulation, the dark clouds in the sky disappeared just as quickly as they had first materialized, and the light of the sun came seeping through in the blink of an eye. Before long, there was not a single cloud to be seen in the sky. At this moment, the endless sky beast, was situated at the center of the formation, enshrouded within layers of grayish-white demonic chi. It was as if the demon beast had been encapsulated within a massive cocoon, and the surface of the cocoon was squirming and writhing gently. Han Li was not surprised to see this at all. After withstanding the lightning tribulation, the endless sky beast was reconstructing its body and adopting a human form. Generally speaking, This transformation was outside of the demon beast's control. It was just like the birth of a human. No one could determine their looks from birth, as that was predetermined by genetics. However, the appearance of a demon beast's human form was somewhat dependent on their true form. For example, demon beasts like demonic foxes would usually undergo metamorphosis to become handsome men and beautiful women, while demon beasts with hideous forms to begin with usually had ugly human forms as well. A thought suddenly occurred to Han Li, and he cast his gaze toward the distance. There, the carcass of the mutated narwhal worm had been completely engulfed into nothingness by the gold-devouring beetles. At this moment, the swarm of beetles was buzzing incessantly as they hovered in midair. Han Li let loose a long cry, and the golden swarm of beetles immediately flew toward him before being stored away in his spirit beast pouch. He then sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes as he awaited the conclusion of the endless sky beast's metamorphosis. A day and a night passed. When Han Li opened his eyes again, a dull thump suddenly erupted from within the gigantic cocoon. A fair and tender arm punched through the surface of the cocoon, and the familiar voice of a small child sounded from within. "I've finally succeeded. Thank you for your efforts, fellow Taoist Han." Han Li smiled upon hearing this before slowly rising to his feet. Several days later, Han Li returned to the interconnected peaks on the Dreamcloud Mountains. At present, he was situated within the secret chamber of his cave abode, holding the shimmering golden horn in his hand with the 3 container treasures placed before him. A large azure cauldron that was around 10 feet in size was hovering in the air before him, and a small child in yellow robes was sitting atop the cauldron. The small child was currently reading an aged hide book in his hands that it was holding in its hands. This child was naturally none other than the endless sky beast in its human form. It wasn't exactly identical to the projection that it had manifested in the past, but it bore a strong resemblance to that projection. That made sense, seeing as the demon beast's true body in the spirit realm had already undergone metamorphosis once, so it would naturally have a rough idea of what its human form would look like. That was why it was able to manifest a projection with roughly the same appearance. Han Li stroked the bumpy patterns on the surface of the golden horn with his finger, and after a while, he suddenly said, "After some experimentation, I've discovered that this horn can absorb almost all types of spiritual power, and also release it. The only flaws are that it's only able to absorb a limited amount of spiritual power at once, and the rate of absorption is also rather slow." A small child put down the book in his hands and turned to Han Li with a vibrant smile as he said, "As expected of a material from a mutated demon beast, spiritual absorption is a very rare ability. There are countless cultivators even in the spirit realm who are dying for a material with such an extraordinary ability. It's the ideal material for refining defensive-type treasures, and many renowned defensive-type spirit treasures have incorporated this type of material." "Defensive-type treasures, can this be used to refine battle armor?" Han Li asked. You really are very smart, fellow Taoist Han. You should be able to use this horn and your fire spirit threads to refine a powerful suit of battle armor. Even if it won't be a spirit treasure, it won't be too far away from that level either. However, my advice is that you should refrain from doing that," the small child said with a serious expression. "Why is that? I'm in need of a suit of battle armor at the moment." A hint of confusion flashed through Han Li's eyes. "If you want to spend the rest of your life here in this human world and regard safety as your #1 priority, then refining a suit of battle armor is naturally your best option. However, if you want to sneak into the spirit realm through a spatial node, it's best to keep this item to refine another type of treasure," the small child explained. "What other types of treasure can be refined using this thing?" Han Li asked. "The realm-transcending bead, of course. That treasure will assist you greatly in your attempt to pass through a spatial node," the small child replied. "A realm-transcending bead. If I recall correctly, you seem to have used something known as a realm-transcending stone when your avatar descended into the human world. What is the relationship between those 2 treasures? Are they the same thing?" Han Li asked with a hint of surprise in his voice. The small child thought about this question carefully before replying. "Their names are very similar, and they are indeed related. The realm-transcending stone is a disposable, naturally occurring treasure that is only found in the spirit realm, whereas a realm-transcending bead is a refined treasure that can be used more than once. The 2 serve a similar purpose, but the difference in their levels of potency is like that of night and day. I'll put it this way for you. A realm-transcending bead only has about 1% of a realm-transcending stone's power." 1%? Han Li was slightly speechless upon hearing this. Don't look down on the realm transcending bead just because of that, fellow Taoist Han. You have to realize that realm transcending stones are exceedingly rare, even in the spirit realm, and it ranks alongside the star-defying plate as one of the 3 most sought-after realm transcending treasures. The realm transcending bead obviously can't compare to those 2 treasures, but it's still very renowned for its ability to break through some spatial restrictions. The fact that it requires a spiritual absorption material to refine makes it just as rare. Driven by my curiosity, I entered a spatial node in the spirit realm once, and even though I immediately returned, I'm still struck by a lingering sense of fear whenever I recall the fearsome power of the spatial storm and the boundary between realms within that spatial node. Even if you can cultivate your law-destruction eye to its maximal extent, there's still only an infinitesimal chance that you'll be able to pass through a spatial node. Otherwise, there would be countless cultivators in the spirit realm who have snuck over from lower realms. Don't even try to pass through a spatial node without a realm-transcending bead. It'll be the last thing you ever do. I was going to wait until you reached the deity transformation stage before I warned you about this, but seeing as you have a spiritual absorption material now, this is something that you should be made aware of, the small child warned. Looks like I have no choice but to refine this realm-transcending bead then. A wry smile appeared on Han Li's face. If it weren't for the fact that you already have the law-destruction eye, I wouldn't even bother mentioning this treasure to you. Only with both on your side would you have the slightest sliver of a chance to pass through a spatial node. I'll give you the refinement method for this bead in return for the glacial quintessence you gave me, the small child chuckled. Han Li suddenly changed the subject and said, You sure don't like to owe people favors. By the way, I wanted to ask you something. I witnessed the tribulation transcendence of an 8th-grade demonic tortoise in the past, but its lightning tribulation was very different compared to yours. Your lightning tribulation seemed to have been far more powerful than the one I witnessed. That's not anything to be surprised about. Different demon beasts naturally have to withstand different lightning tribulations. The more powerful a demon beast is, the more formidable their lightning tribulation becomes. It's rumored that heavenly spirit beasts like dragon and phoenixes have to withstand 13 waves of lightning strikes during their metamorphosis stage lightning tribulations. I'm already quite lucky that I only had to withstand 11 waves, the small child revealed. I see, Han Li was enlightened upon hearing this. The small child held up the aged hide book with a hint of a smile on his face and asked, This demon cultivation art, the 9 Gale transformations, is rather interesting, but why are you showing it to me? Could it be that you're interested in cultivation arts from our demon race? It turned out that the book the small child was reading was none other than the aged hide book that Han Li had obtained from Xiao Qiuyer. Within the book, there was a nameless aura concealment technique, as well as a demonic cultivation art written in demon script. Only after learning the demon script did Han Li discover that this was a cultivation art known as the 9 Gale transformations. It was a very powerful cultivation art, but it had been designed exclusively for demon beasts. Unless one was born with a pair of wings and possessed the powerful body of a demon beast, they wouldn't be able to use this cultivation art. However, he was now giving it to the small child for examination for some reason. This 9 Gale transformations is quite a powerful cultivation art, and I just so happen to be missing a cultivation art that corresponds with my thunderstorm wings. It would be a waste to discard such a powerful technique, so I was hoping to modify this cultivation art so that it can be used by me. You're a demon beast, fellow Taoist endless sky, so it shouldn't be too difficult for you to modify this cultivation art for my usage, right? In return, I can lend you that half-page of the Golden Jade tome for examination and research. The page may be a prized treasure, but it's too profound for me to comprehend for now, Han Li proposed. This cultivation art is indeed quite difficult to come by for the demon beasts of your human world, and it does correspond nicely with your thunderstorm wings. However, there's a major problem here, one that I'm sure you're aware of already. In order to unleash this technique, you must possess the powerful body of a demon beast. You've cultivated in a body refinement art before, so your body is far more powerful than that of the average human cultivator, but it's still not enough if your goal is to use this cultivation art, the small child mused with furrowed brows. And Li contemplated the issue for a while before replying, As long as the gap I have to bridge isn't too large, this shouldn't be an unreachable goal for me. I have a Buddhist cultivation art known as the Bright Jade Arts, and with each layer I reach in that cultivation art, my body becomes a lot powerful than it was before. I've already reached the 2nd layer now, and once I get to the 3rd layer, I should be able to satisfy the conditions required to cultivate the 9 Gale transformations. The small child faltered slightly before a surprised look appeared on his face. The bright Jade arts, a Buddhist cultivation art. What is it? Is there something wrong with this cultivation art? Hanli asked with furrowed brows. The small child replied with a question of his own. How many layers is your cultivation art split into? Hanli was rather perplexed by this line of questioning, but he still replied truthfully, 7. A peculiar smile appeared on the small child's face as he exclaimed, what a coincidence! I also have a Buddhist body refinement art that's split up into 7 layers. Hanli faltered upon hearing this. A hint of befuddlement flashed through his eyes, and he couldn't comprehend why the endless sky beast was saying this. This cultivation art originates from Buddhist origins, but it's something that everyone uses in the spirit realm. It's even more popular than the basic cultivation arts of the 5 elements used by qi condensation cultivators, the small child explained. Everyone uses this cultivation art. Could it be that you're also referring to? Hanli was starting to read between the lines, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D410, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D680, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. This Buddhist cultivation art can even be used by mortals in the spirit realm who possess no spiritual roots. If a mortal reaches the 3rd layer or above in this cultivation art, then obtains some special weapons, they'll even be able to combat low-grade cultivators and demon beasts. If they can reach the 5th layer or above, even mid-grade cultivators and demon beasts wouldn't dare to mess with them for no good reason, then. The small child chuckled coldly. Hanli was flabbergasted to hear this, and only after a long while did he respond in an incredulous manner. Surely you jest, fellow Taoist endless sky. You're telling me that mortals can combat us cultivators. You haven't ascended to the spirit realm yet, so there's no point for me tell you too much about it. But this is something that I wouldn't mind disclosing to you. In the spirit realm, the mortals are an extremely important force in the human race. Furthermore, there were some exceptionally intellectually endowed figures among the mortals who studied some basic cultivation arts used by cultivators and demon beasts, and managed to discover ways to refine their own bodies using the spiritual qi from their environment without having to rely on spiritual roots. In the end, they managed to devise a unique set of cultivation principles. There are even some particularly outstanding warriors among the mortals who have slain high-grade cultivators and demon beasts. This is not something that's uncommon in the spirit realm. The cultivation art I'm referring to is known as the Vajra arts, and it's one of the cultivation arts used most regularly among the mortals. Even so, surely mortals still can't compare with cultivators. After all, the vast majority of cultivation arts and treasures are still unusable to them, Hanli countered with furrowed brows. Of course, mortals are still mortals in the end, and no matter how powerful they become, without spiritual roots, they're still unable to pursue the great Tao. Their lifespans reach a mere 100 years, and even if they can obtain some treasures or medicines that can extend their lifespans, it'll only give them 100 more years to live at most. That's their maximal limit. However, in the spirit realm, the postnatal acquirement of spiritual roots is possible. Among the 3 human sovereigns, the heavenly Yuan Holy Sovereign was once an extremely prominent and renowned mortal. Only after encountering a miraculous opportunity was he able to attain a spiritual root and become a cultivator, but in terms of power and abilities, he's not inferior to his other 2 counterparts at all. The small child's expression became rather solemn as he spoke. Hanli stroked his chin and was at a loss for words. Don't think too much about this matter. The mortals in the spirit realm are only able to achieve all of this due to the fact that the spiritual qi density in the spirit realm is far superior to that of lower realms. Your human world has endured a devilish tribulation long ago, and the spiritual qi density here is far inferior compared to the other lower realms. Even if mortals were to obtain the cultivation arts from the spirit realm that I mentioned, they wouldn't be able to absorb the world's origin qi into their bodies anyway, so there's no way that they'd be able to cultivate, the small child explained. Other lower realms. Does that mean there are more lower realms than just the human world? Hanli was very surprised to hear this. A peculiar look appeared on the small child's face as he said, of course, there are hundreds, if not over 1,000 lower realms beneath our spirit realm. All of the most exceptional cultivators from these lower realms would ascend to the spirit realm, and barely any have ascended from the human world in the past years. However, there have been many cultivators ascending from other lower realms that haven't been invaded by elder devils. I decided to send my avatar to the human world firstly, because the spiritual qi is very sparse here. That makes it more difficult for my avatar to descend into this realm, but it makes it easier for me to avoid my great tribulation. Secondly, this is a realm dominated by the human race, so no one would suspect that I would send my avatar to this realm. Otherwise, if my enemies were to learn my backup plan and destroy this avatar of mine, all of my efforts would have been in vain. Han Li was speechless once again. He had always thought that the human world was a unique existence, which was why the spirit realm had gone to the effort of deploying cultivators into the human world to combat the invasion of the elder devils. However, after hearing the endless sky beast's words, it was clear that there were other factors behind that decision. All right, that's enough about the spirit realm. It won't benefit you to learn too much about it for now. Let's talk about the Vajra arts first. This cultivation art can be used even by mortals without spiritual roots, but it's also renowned in the spirit realm for being extremely difficult to cultivate. There are very few people who can reach the third layer, let alone the fifth layer. Most of the mortals in the spirit realm have only reached the first layer, which will somewhat enhance their bodies, but the effects won't be very useful. Reaching the second layer of the cultivation art requires the cleansing of the marrow, which is an excruciating process that not many people can withstand. However, there are many mortals within the spirit realm, and reaching the second layer would allow one to become as powerful a low-grade demon beast, so there are always some who are willing and able to endure the painful process. I've never heard of your bright jade arts, but I'm sure it's very much related to this cultivation art. After all, there are only a handful of Buddhist body refinement cultivation arts, and this is most likely the only one among those cultivation arts that can be used in the human world. The small child was very confident in his judgment. Han Li also felt like that was a very plausible notion, and he nodded as he said, "Perhaps that's true. It's indeed been rather difficult for me to cultivate the bright jade arts. Give me a jade slip. I'll give you a copy of the Vajra arts for you to examine. If it's the same cultivation art as your bright jade arts, then it won't do you much good, but if they're not the same thing, you can choose one between them to cultivate." The small child was suddenly being very generous. I'll have to thank you in advance then, fellow Taoist Endless Sky. Han Li certainly wasn't going to decline such a tempting offer. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he flipped his hand over to produce a jade slip before tossing it to the small child. The Endless Sky beast caught the jade slip, before slowly closing his eyes to replicate the cultivation art. The smile on Han Li's face faded, and his brows furrowed as memories of a copper plate and another cultivation art surfaced in his mind. They were none other than the sacred provenance plate, as well as the heaven-bearing devil arts that he had obtained from man Xianxia. There was nothing to be said about the sacred provenance plate. He was already certain that this demonic cultivation art and the bright jade arts had both originated from the elder devil realm. Furthermore, they were, respectively, the cultivation art required to unleash the technique, and the mandatory basic body refinement cultivation art. Unfortunately, there was a missing link in the middle, and that was the cultivation art for the transformation ability. When he had obtained the heaven-bearing devil arts from man Xianxia, he had only inspected it briefly before ascertaining that this cultivation art was that missing link. He didn't know how it had become a top-grade devilish art, but that didn't really matter. What was important was that he had somehow gathered the complete set of cultivation arts. Furthermore, the fact that the 9 Gale transformations that Han Li wanted to cultivate required progression in the bright jade arts made him feel as if there were some kind of profound greater power at work, trying to make him cultivate the sacred provenance plate. A series of thoughts flashed through Han Li's mind, and after about 10 minutes, the small child sitting atop the cauldron suddenly opened his eyes before raising a hand, sending a burst of yellow light flying toward Han Li. Han Li immediately swept a sleeve through the air, catching the yellow light to reveal the jade slip within. "The cultivation art has been recorded in there. You can have a look at it first," the small child said in a calm voice. Han Li nodded and immediately seeped his spiritual sense into the jade slip to examine the cultivation art within. After just a short while, Han Li heaved a faint sigh and withdrew his spiritual sense. The small child's expression remained unchanged as he asked in an indifferent manner, "Is the same as your bright jade arts?" Han Li was silent for a moment before replying, "It is. There are some additional spiritual qi absorption methods detailed in the Vajra arts, but everything else is completely identical." Small child seemed to have expected this result, and he waved the aged hide book in his hand as he said, "That's settled then. If you want to cultivate the 9 Gale transformations, you'll have to progress to the third layer of the bright jade arts first. During that time, I'll alter the 9 gale transformations so it becomes suitable for you to use. The thunderstorm wings are only a pair of treasures, and not real wings after all, so some adjustments to the cultivation art will be required. Don't forget that you promised to lend me the golden jade tome after this. Hanli smiled and pointed to the 3 container treasures before him as he said, "Rest assured, fellow Taoist Endless Sky, I won't go back on my word. Before we begin, are you not going to consume any more of this imperial elixir?" The small child glanced at the treasures before shaking his head as he replied, "The imperial elixir is indeed a fantastic medicine. It can help demon beasts develop intelligence, and is of the utmost importance for demon beasts going through metamorphosis to attain a human form. For human cultivators, consumption of the imperial elixir can also expand the meridians and greatly enhance the body. However, it's not advisable to consume too much of it at once, and it can't be stored for more than a month, so it's currently useless to me. Seeing as you're planning to cultivate the bright jade arts, this will be quite useful for you. If that's the case, then I'll be taking these for myself." Hanli smiled as he swept a sleeve through the air, up in which the bowl and the jade vial disappeared in unison, leaving only the gourd remaining on the ground. He then made a hand seal and a faint light shimmered in his eyes. All of a sudden, silver light flashed from beside one of the walls of the secret chamber, and another, Hanli, appeared out of thin air. As soon as this Hanli appeared in the secret chamber, it immediately feigned a grabbing motion toward the gourd lying on the ground. The treasure was instantly sucked into his grasp, and silver light flashed again as Hanli disappeared into the wall. A hint of surprise appeared on the small child's face upon seeing this, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he merely cupped his fist toward Hanli as a salute before also vanishing into the cauldron. Hanli took a glance at the jade slip in his hand before joining his palms, upon which the jade slip disappeared. He then slowly closed his eyes and began to meditate in a seated position. Almost at the exact same moment, a streak of silver light shot forth from the main peak that Hanli's cave abode was situated on. Following a few flashes, the silver streak of light had already disappeared into a certain restricted area within the drifting cloud sect. Not long after that, the streak of silver light flew out from within the restricted area again and returned to the interconnected peaks. Hanli continued to remain in the secret chamber, yet during this time, a streak of silver light would occasionally fly out from his cave abode before disappearing into the distance. However, the streak of silver light would always return to the interconnected peaks following intervals of several days to around a month, and no one knew what it was up to. Time passed in a flash, and 2 years flew by in the blink of an eye.